Okay, we are now streaming live, so I'm going to call the Finance Committee to order. This is Thursday, February 4th, and we're going to be taking testimony on S1. S1 is a bill that we did last year. It didn't make it through the process. I don't know, Senator Bray, is that another one that went to your committee and didn't come out, or did this go to the other body?
Rygate went to the other side.
And didn't
met
make it
its
through the
demise there.
process.
Right.
Because we didn't send it out early on.
Right.
We did a lot of discussion on it. So we're going to take it up, but if any of the new folks feel you need more information, just let me know and we'll arrange that. But so we're going to start with Luke, and Luke's going to walk us through this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Luke Marland, Director of Legislative Counsel and Chief Counsel to the General Assembly. And as the Chair indicated, I'm here today on S1. And what I'd like to do is give you a brief background on the Standard Offer Program and then walk through the bill for you. And as I always say, please ask questions. Zoom is sort of tough because I can't really see you and you can't always see me clearly. But if you have a question, please interrupt or raise your hand. And Madam Chair, do you want me to recognize questions or would you rather do that? I don't know if you're saying, I'm sorry, you're still muted. So I thought I could read your lips, but I.
Yes, I'm muted because we're moving some furniture into
Gotcha.
the house and there's some banging going on. Why don't you answer the questions? I think you are probably better able to see them. If you put something up, I can't see people.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
On the screen.
So let me give you a brief background on the Standard Offer Program. Standard Offer Program was started, I forget exactly when it started, it may have been around 2009. It's set forth in 30 VSA 8005 small a. And the program changed over time, but at a very high level, it required Vermont utilities to buy renewable power from eligible generators at a set price for a set period. And there would be contracts that were entered into, and some of those were quite long-term, for example, up to 25 years. And it included various technologies, including solar and, in this case, biomass. And the contracts are administered by a standard offer facilitator who is appointed by the PUC. And then the cost of that renewable power is divided up between Vermont's electric utilities. Now, 30 VSA 8009 establishes a subset of the Standard Offer Program. And 30 VSA 8009 is the baseload renewable power portfolio requirement. So baseload renewable power portfolio requirement, for all intents and purposes, that equals Rygate. So when you hear that term, really what we're talking about is the Rygate facility. As I said, in essence, this is a subset of the Standard Offer Program, and it is defined in a manner that only applies to the Rygate facility. Now, 30 VSA 8009 requires the current law that from 2012 to November 2022, that electricity provided by each Vermont retail electricity provider must include a pro rata share of the baseload renewable power portfolio. In other words, the power generated by the Rygate plant. We're here on S1 today, but as the chair indicated, this is really the same bill as S190 from last year that this committee passed out and then the Senate passed out, but it did not go any further in the House. So I was asked to basically redo or repeat the same bill that you looked at last year and that your body passed out last year. I would now like to walk through the actual bill itself. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. I assume that you may have it on one of your monitors at home or a paper copy if you printed it out. I am not going to read line by line, but I'll tell you what the language says, and I'll either summarize or read for you the most important parts of the bill. And as I said earlier, please stop me if anything's unclear or you have a question. So if you're looking on page 1 of the bill, there's just a minor stylistic change. It just conforms on line 15, the current language in the statute to our drafting convention. It is not a substantive legal change. And the same is so for page 2, line 7, we're correcting a cross citation. So neither of these are substantive. The real substance of the bill begins on page 2 on line 15. As I just summarized for you, the current requirement expires on November 1st, 2022, and this changes it to 2032. So it's extending the current law. Under D, there's a rewriting of this provision, and it states on line 19 that on or before January 1st, 2022, the Commission, which refers to the Public Utility Commission, shall determine for the period beginning November 1st, 2022, and keep that in mind because we'll talk about that same date at the very end of the bill in the last section, and ending on November 1st, 2032, the price to be paid, etc. And then this language continues on the next page. This is a section that asks the PUC to set the price for the power from Ryegate. And beginning here on the language I just read for you, and then continuing on the next couple pages, there are certain factors that they will include in their analysis of what price is appropriate. So if you flip over to the next page, now we're on page 3, you'll see that the top half of the page is existing law. So all that we've done so far is extend the period for the Ryegate plant, and we've modified a little bit this section that deals with how they set the price. But most of page 3 is merely repeating current law. In other words, it's not new law. But if you flip over to page 4, you'll see, starting on line 7, you'll see a new 7, and then below it a new 8, a new 9, and a new 10. And these are new, this is new language. These are new factors for the PUC to incorporate in its process of determining the avoided cost and therefore the price that it will set for the power from the Ryegate plant. So this is really now getting into the substance of this bill. This language largely came from various stakeholders last year. So the stakeholders had conferred, they had discussed this language. Some of those same stakeholders are in the committee room today, and they'll be testifying in a few minutes. And this was their agreed upon language. I did not modify it. I simply carried it over from last year. And there may well be, because it was last year, some thoughts about how to modify that language. But what you see right now is exactly what you approved last session. So let's now go through it. If you look on number 7, which starts on line 7 on page 4, it includes this once again, the factors that PUC will determine in setting the avoided cost and therefore the price for the Ryegate power. PUC will now look at mechanisms for encouraging dispatch of the proposed plant relative to the ISO New England wholesale energy price and the value of REC renewable energy credits, while also respecting the physical operating parameters and fixed costs of the proposed plant. Number 8, whether the fuel supply, in other words, the biomass, is obtained from ecologically sound and sustainable sources. In the case of biomass, this shall include an assessment of whether fuel supplies use ecologically sound harvesting practices and whether they promote a diverse and sustainable forest economy in the region. Number 9, the appropriate...
Madam Chair, do you want questions as we go or hold them till the finished, we walk all the way through? Pardon me, Mr. Martland. So we can't
Mhm.
hear you.
If we waited till at least he went through this section,
Okay, thank you.
okay? And then,
Thank you. Number 9, the appropriate assignment of risks associated with the ISO New England forward capacity market pay for performance project. Number 10, any potential opportunities associated with having the proposed plant withdraw from the ISO New England forward capacity market while respecting the economic parameters of the proposed plant. And then you'll see 3 asterisks, which means the current text in the current law stays in. So at this point, Senator Bray, I can try to answer your question. We're done with looking at the factors that the PUC will look at in determining avoided cost.
Okay, thank you. Do you know what the, I don't really know what the meaning is of the phrase begins on line 9, while also respecting the physical operating parameters and fixed costs of the proposed plant.
I believe you have a representative of the Rygate plant in the meeting right now. I think it'd probably be more appropriate if he answers that.
Okay,
wait
And,
till that witness comes up.
great, thank you. The other thing is when we're talking about proposed plant, are we talking about the existing Rygate plant with improvements, or I'm just a little uncertain as to what the proposed plant is, when I thought we were mostly concerned with relicensing or extending the license period of the existing plant.
So I share that understanding with you. I think that is what you were concerned with. I think
Okay.
you should also ask the other witnesses to see if I'm mistaken in that manner. And yes, I believe that this language was meant to talk about the Rygate plant and any potential modifications to it, but it's not talking about a new or different biomass plant. We're talking about the current Rygate plant.
Great, thank you.
Sandra Brock. Randy, you're muted. Sandra, you're muted.
I wonder if you could take a look at paragraph 7 and translate that for me.
I'll begin the process, and I think some of the other witnesses can take it a little further. As I indicated, this was language agreed to by various stakeholders, and I think they could provide greater clarity than I can. But I think I can begin that process, or at least I hope I can. So when you're talking about dispatch for ISO New England purposes, you're basically talking about what the generating resources are and which ones are used first and how much they cost. So I believe usually under the ISO New England umbrella, the lower cost resources will be dispatched first, meaning used first, and then higher cost resources, higher cost energy will be used later as necessary. So this is what basically I'll begin the process, and other people can, I'm sure, can drill down, but it's talking about mechanisms for encouraging, I would say, economic dispatch of the power from Rygate relative to ISO New England and their wholesale energy price, and also the value of any credits, RECs, that can be traded back and forth. How that works day in and day out, or how it will work over the course of a year, I can't answer that. I think some of the other witnesses could break that down for you further.
I will
Was that the
refer with
least bit
interest.
helpful, or was that worse?
Well, I still don't understand it, but hopefully the witnesses who will testify will explain it to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm straining my memory. We did this last year at the same time we were looking at the renewable energy bill, and I remember the solar is cheaper, but we didn't get a whole lot of solar in November. And so this biomass plant, it's the only biomass plant we have, but it gives us the surety that if we have 2 more months like November and December this year, that we will have some renewable energy available. And there was a lot of discussion. I can see Senator McDonald, and he was the reporter, I believe, last year. You're muted, Mark.
Thank you. Last year, I'm one of the witness. Someone just spoke about renewing the license. Are we renewing the license or are we renewing the contract?
This bill renews the requirement that, in essence, power from Rygate be allocated among the different retail electricity providers in the state, thereby renewing the reason for Rygate to continue operating. So it renews the requirement that allows Rygate to keep operating longer term.
Okay. So absent such a bill, when the current operator of the plant finishes its 10-year contract, they would have to shut it down unless this bill were to pass. Is that a fair interpretation?
I would ask the representative of Rygate if that's so.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
Get to them.
And secondly, I think it was also mentioned that this is the only wood burning electric plant, but that does not, it's the only one carved out in this language, but there is another wood burner up in Burlington. Is that correct?
That is accurate. I think you're referring to the McNeil plant. But as far as this requirement in statute, it applies to Rygate alone. It's written that
Okay.
way. And there's a
Thank you.
PUC decision that makes that
Yeah,
clear.
yeah.
Yes, gotcha.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So now we've talked to, Madam Chair, were you about to say something?
No.
Okay. So we've talked about the new language added to the criteria that the PUC will use in assessing the avoided cost and the value of the power generated by Rygate. We're now going to flip over to page 5. We're going to look at subsections J and K. This is also new language. It begins on line 9. And what J basically says is the commission shall authorize any agency participating in the proceedings under this section to assess its costs against a proposed plan consistent with section 21 of this title. And section 21 of the title basically allows a state agency to allocate its costs back to the plant or back to the requester of the order or proceeding. So it's basically a bill back provision. And this would allow any agency participating in proceeding concerning Rygate to bill back its costs to Rygate. Letter K requires ACCD to look at utilizing excess heat from the plant for other potential purposes and to report back to various committees by January of 2022. So there was some discussion in the committee last year about whether some of the heat, excess heat, could be used for other purposes. This requires ACCD to look at that and then report back to the General Assembly. If you flip over to page 6, subsection L, this says that in considering the assessment of whether fuel supplies use ecologically sound harvesting practices and where they promote a diverse and sustainable forest economy. And remember, this is tracking some of the language we looked at a few moments ago on a prior page. The Agency of Natural Resources shall provide input to the Commission regarding any recommended changes to the harvesting practices. Before I go on to section 2, the transition provision, are there any questions about what I've covered so far? So, yes, Senator.
Sorry, I may need to hold this for the operators. I'm just wondering if Rygate currently is permitted with conditions that include harvest, procurement standards.
I think some of the other witnesses can answer that in more detail and answer that better.
Okay, thanks.
Section 2 is a transition provision. There's currently an order of the Public Utility Commission that's in effect, and there's a citation to that in this section. And what it basically says is that that will continue in effect through October 31st, 2022. If you remember earlier in the bill, I said, remember this date. You see that the bill takes effect on passage, and pursuant to the sections of the bill we talked about a few moments ago, the PUC sets the price for the period from November 22 until 2032. This transition provision is in effect from the time the bill becomes law until the end of October 2022. So it's sort of a stopgap that keeps the current order in place. And by that time, the PUC has determined the price starting from November 1st, 2022, and then will continue to determine the price until the end of 2032. Does that make sense to everyone? And then last but not least, you have an effective date upon passage. Now, there was an amendment submitted by some of the witnesses that I had written up in an effort to save time, but I think there's probably some suggested changes to that. So I spoke to the chair earlier. I don't think I'll go through that proposed amendment. And I think some of the witnesses also have additional suggestions for further amendments. So at this point, I would stop unless there's questions. Yes, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Luke, and apologies, I missed a lot of your report. I'm dealing with a family situation, but I have a really basic question.
Sure.
You said it at the beginning, and then in this transition section, it mentions a standard offer price. What could you just define that for me? What standard?
Standard offered is a program,
Okay.
and basically Rygate is a subset of that program. The law we've been looking at is a subset of standard offer, and it pertains only to the Rygate facility. And the Public Utility Commission engages in a process to set the price of the power.
Okay.
And then each retail electricity provider has to use some of that power and pay for some of that power.
But it's only relevant to Rygate.
What we're talking about in this bill absolutely is only relevant to Rygate. Okay. Standard offer is bigger, and some of those contracts I think still continue, but they're separate from this bill. In this bill, we're only talking about the Rygate plant.
Okay, but a standard offer in and of itself is just essentially the price of the electricity?
Standard offer is bigger. It's a program that was begun a few years ago to incentivize or support more renewable power plants.
Okay.
They long-term contracts, so some of those still continue, are still with us, but I don't know if there's new standard offers being entered into. As you see from the existing law, Rygate will end in 2022. I'm sorry, the statute will end in 2022, and this will extend it for another 10 years to 2032.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Pearson.
Thank you. Luke, if a school wants to put in a wood-fired furnace, they have to get some kind of air quality permit from the state, I believe, right?
I'm not sure about a school. I don't know. I think some folks have to get that permit. I don't know if there's any exception. So I don't know about schools specifically. I'm sorry.
So generally when you're, I know in Senate Ag, we've looked at advanced wood heat quite a bit, and part of the challenge is passing air quality standards from DEC. Does that apply here, or are power producers just handled entirely somewhere else, or can you help me understand that?
I don't know about Rygate, actually. I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. So I don't know if Rygate needs air quality permit. I think some of the other witnesses can answer that. I don't know.
Okay, if we don't hear it,
I can check on that. Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
They do.
And the bill itself. I'm
Okay.
not seeing any, and I'm going to move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. I'm going to move on to Dylan's Wiki, who's representing Stored Solar. So Dylan, maybe you can give us some background and let us know why this is being requested. And I think you have Mr. Harrington also from Stored Solar with you.
I do, that's right. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the Dylan's Wiki with Leonine Public Affairs, I'm here joined by Bill Harrington, who's the director of Stored Solar. Stored Solar is the current owner and operator of the Rygate biomass plant. So Luke's correct that while Rygate is not specifically named in S1, the bill really exclusively relates to the biomass plant located in Rygate. The bill has the same text as S190 as it passed out of this committee last year and out of the Senate. And we thank the committee members who were here last year very much for your work on this bill. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, by the time the bill got over to the Energy and Technology Committee in the House, they were unable to take it up when the legislature returned for the fall session, and so it ultimately died at the end of the 2020 session. So just a brief bit of history here. The Rygate biomass power station is a 20.5 megawatt biomass plant. It was built in 1992. As I mentioned, the current owners are Stored Solar. They acquired the plant between the time this committee passed the bill last year and today. Under 30 VSA 8009, which is the statute dealt with in S1, Vermont's electric distribution utilities are required to purchase the plant's output as set by the PUC. The one small exemption is that Burlington Electric is exempt from that requirement because they currently get more than 1/3 of their power supply from a biomass plant, which is McNeil. So, after the legislature passed this section of statute, I believe in 2011 originally, in October of 2012, the PUC issued an order setting the rate that the utilities have to pay per kilowatt hour at a levelized price over 10 years. The rate in that order is subject to being increased or decreased if the price for biomass changes, and there's a formula included in that order. But my understanding is that that provision has rarely, if ever, been utilized. So in effect, S1, as Luke laid out, basically extends that must-take obligation for another 10 years until November 1, 2032. And sets up the process for the PUC to go about establishing a new rate for that new 10-year period. So as Luke also mentioned, the language included in the bill is really, and some of the additions are the result of a collaborative approach with a number of different stakeholders, including the Department of Public Service, Agency of Natural Resources, and Vermont Utilities. And I'll just note that I know Doug Smith from GMP is also scheduled to testify and bring forward a couple of small amendments to the bill. We've taken a look at those and don't find them to be problematic in the least. So we do support the amendments that Doug will walk you through later. I think significantly for the committee's purpose, in addition to the underlying considerations that the PUC is asked to weigh when setting a new rate, they are supposed to take into account additional considerations that are included in S1, including but not limited to those that Senators Bray and Brock asked about. And I'll touch briefly on those, but I'm going to defer to Ed McNamara from the Department of Public Service, who was instrumental in drafting those language changes and really can speak more in depth about the impact that they would have on the rate moving forward. But just a very high level, sub 7, Senator Brock, you had asked about that. Basically what that does is, at particular points in the year, particularly those in the cold winter months when there might be a higher demand for electricity on particularly cold days, that's when the value of Rygate is particularly strong to Vermont's electric ratepayers because it is the only baseload power source that might be producing at that particular point in time. There are other points in the year when the rivers are running particularly strongly or solar is really pumping, when those other renewable resources may come at a lower cost to Vermont's utilities. The idea is in sub 7 that in developing the rate, the PUC should look at those factors and determine whether or not the plant should or should not ramp down at different points throughout the course of the year. It doesn't explicitly say that the plant should, but just adds another factor for the PUC to consider in setting up that new 10-year agreement for the state. As a general proposition, the biomass or wood chips for the plant are generated from chipping the tops and limbs of trees that are otherwise harvested for saw logs or pulpwood. as opposed to just leaving those tops to decay on the forest floor. In some instances, low-value whole trees are chipped for the biomass plant. The majority of that, the biomass does come from forest land that is nearby to the plant within a 60-mile radius. There's obviously a cost associated with trucking the biomass from wherever it is harvested to the plant. So it is in the plant owner's interest to get that from a local source. The value that this plant brings to Vermont and the region is significant for the forest economy. The harvesting associated with the plant provides value to forest land and an economic incentive for landowners of large forest tracts, as opposed to subdividing them and developing them. They can responsibly manage those tracts of land and keep them preserved. It's also important to, really is important to the forest economy. In the last year, 47 different logging companies provided Rygate with wood. There's 21 full-time jobs at the plant, and it's associated with the employment of about 250 individuals in ancillary benefits. Those are all, good paying jobs at the plant. One question Senator Bray raised with respect to the current conditions in the plant under the original CPG for Rygate. They are required to have a forester staff at the plant. Department of Fish and Wildlife is notified of every harvesting job associated with the plant. If they have concerns about the impact that the harvesting job will have, they review the process job and impose conditions on how it's conducted. And I know Commissioner Porter is on as well, so I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions about that side of things. One potential change that we would ask the committee to consider relates to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development study. The bill, as introduced and as passed by the Senate last year, requires ACCD to conduct a study concerning the feasibility of utilizing the excess heat generated by the plant. Utilizing that excess heat would increase its thermal efficiency. As a result of the COVID-19 emergency, what we've heard from folks at ACCD is that they are underwater dealing with the economic response to the pandemic, and would prefer not to be saddled with that responsibility during a pandemic. The good news that I can report to you today is that Stored Solar is willing to facilitate such a study, but it's also worth noting that they recently entered into a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, with a company concerning the possibility of actually developing a shrimp farm at the plant that would utilize the excess heat from the plant. Stored Solar's parent company has a lot of experience with combined heat and power biomass plants in Europe, and is very interested in seeing that the excess heat from this plant is utilized. So they're basically already sort of ahead of the curve and beyond the point of a feasibility study. But if it would provide some comfort to the committee, we would certainly be willing to be tasked with a feasibility study if the shrimp farm does not materialize. And we've drafted some language that would essentially require that in that case. I think that's mostly it. I know there's some questions about efficiency, and Senator Pearson had some questions about air quality permits. I would note that in 2016, a selective catalytic reduction system, or SCR, was actually installed at the plant at a pretty significant cost of about $7.1 million. The SCR pretty significantly reduced the emissions of nitrous oxide and particulate matter from the plant, and that in turn qualified the RECs associated with the facility for a higher class of REC. Under current law and under PUC Rule 4.400, the RECs from Rygate do qualify as a Tier 1 resource under the Renewable Energy Standard. So that's the part of the RES that started at 55% and then grows up to 75% over the course of the RES. So it is considered renewable under Vermont law. And just would finally note that the 2016 Comprehensive Energy Plan, in its consideration of biomass, represents that Vermont retain its two existing biomass facilities, McNeil and Reigate, and consider opportunities for improvements in efficiency and the pursuit of waste heat, both of which Reigate is doing. So we feel it falls nicely in line with Vermont's energy goals. And lastly, would just say that the extension of this must-take requirement and the contract laid out in S1 are really integral to the ability for Reigate to continue to operate beyond its current arrangement with the state.
Okay. I just remember all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into this last year, and we're down to arguing about a study. So I guess it was worth the effort. I'm already looking at some of the newer faces, thinking we probably should set up a Rex 101. I don't think it would hurt any of us to review exactly what they are, how they're used, how they aren't used. So we'll see if we can get that on the agenda in the near future. I see Senator Bray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Zwicky, can you fill me in? I just don't, what the current price per megawatt hour is for Reigate Power.
The
What's
current
the-
rate is 10 cents per kilowatt hour.
Okay. And the, do you have an expectation of how that price will be influenced by these new considerations that are listed in 7 through 10? I mean, are you, to be sort of direct about it, are you hoping that they will boost that price, or are these just criteria that must be met in order to participate at all?
Well, I think what I would say is that it's important for the owner and operator of the plant to be able to cover their operating costs. And so to the extent that any of these conditions do increase the cost of operating the plant, that would have an impact on the rate. It also may have a downward impact on the rate. But the point is that the PUC would be able to balance all of these with the impact to the ratepayer in determining what the rate should be for the next 10 years.
Okay.
As I
And
remember it.
Sorry, when you were reporting, your voice cut out at one moment, unfortunately, and that is, so does the current permit include procurement standards or harvesting guidelines?
My understanding is yes, but I would defer to Bill Harrington to see if he has anything else to add on the harvesting standards. They are subject to Fish and Wildlife harvest review, and perhaps Commissioner Porter could comment on that process as well. Okay.
And I don't know if this is your question or not. Paragraph 9, line 16, 17 on page 4, appropriate assignment of risks associated with ISO New England Forward Capacity Market Paid for Performance project. I'm not familiar with that project and what its goals are and how this might fit. Can you explain that one a little bit, please?
I would defer to Ed McNamara on that particular provision.
We're going to have,
and I know that.
Yeah, we're going to have Mr. McNamara in shortly on the agenda, and he's the one that would probably be best able to answer these technical questions. I know we did a lot of discussion, and I see Commissioner Porter is here. So I guess the question now is there presently a harvesting standard?
Is that question to me, Madam Chair?
I believe so.
Under the
Step
PUC, yes, Lewis Porter, Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife. Under the PUC Certificate of Public Good for Reigate, there's a requirement that Fish and Wildlife oversees and looks for habitat and wildlife impacts from these harvests. And so we've reviewed thousands of these harvests over the years, about 206 notifications annually. We do that for both Rygate and BED. The issues we look for are habitat impacts such as deer wintering habitats, wetland or riparian impacts, threatened or endangered species habitat impacts, things of that type.
And may I follow up on that just a bit? Is there a counterpart, for instance, does Commissioner Snyder review the forest impacts associated with harvests? Not habitat per se, but forest impacts.
Okay. Commissioner Snyder has appeared. Do you oversee the forest?
Thanks, Madam Chair. For the record, Michael Snyder, Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. And though we have excellent team relations and professional kind of group work with Fish and Wildlife and kind of approach all this together, no, in a word, no, we don't have a role here per se, according to the CPG. But I'd like to think that Fish and Wildlife biologists that work with our foresters have the same interests in mind. But no, the answer is no, we don't have an official role there.
Sure. Do you with McNeil?
Nope, right, sorry, to not be clear, it's the same for both wood-fired electric plants.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Senator Hardy.
Just to follow up on Senator Bray's question, Commissioner Porter, so you said you reviewed a bunch of these impacts, and have you ever found an impact that you've said this is too much, you have to stop or not do this harvest, or what has been the result of those reviews?
I would say very frequent changes to the harvests, and occasionally harvests that do not go forward. I want to just add that our relationship with the Rygate forester and the BED forester are extremely good. And it's not a contentious system in which we tell them, no, you can't go forward with this harvest. Typically, we discuss the impacts, and sometimes, in fact, the foresters from those plants bring impacts to us and say, we really don't think this chip job, this harvest should go forward. But yes, certainly because of the impacts to those habitats, there are projects that do not go forward.
Okay. So it's neither contentious nor merely a rubber stamp. It's a collaborative, protective process. Is that?
I think that's a great summary of it, and it's developed over a number of years to work that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner, if I remember correctly, there was a lot of testimony last year about the value to the wood products industry because the plant takes less than prime wood that couldn't be disposed of otherwise, things that used to go to paper mills and don't anymore. So there was a real economic benefit, and the wood products industry was in force last year.
Yes. And if I just might add something that might not be readily apparent to the committee, a healthy wood products industry is important to my department and our mission because forest management is habitat management. And without the ability to have logging and forest products industry to manage that habitat, we would not be able to do that. So I would say that the importance of that industry is essential to our mission as it is to my colleague Commissioner Snyder.
I would just also note that sub 8 on page 4 of the bill does direct the PUC to look at the silvicultural and ecologically sound harvesting practices. So that is something that the PUC would consider, and that both forest parks and Fish and Wildlife could weigh in on during the PUC process. So it is acknowledged explicitly in this bill.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Senator Pearson.
Thank you. Commissioner Snyder, any idea of what portion of the woods products kind of economy we're talking about here for Vermont going into Rygate?
It's significant. I could probably come back with a better, more of a number, a quantification. It is highly significant. It's regional, but draws from quite a range. As was mentioned, a standard range of the 60 miles or so is the preferred. But and so it is providing a very important market for, as the chair said, low grade wood that has otherwise has no place to go and plays a role in facilitating other silvicultural and habitat management, as was mentioned. And with the, so it's but I would say for any given operator, those forest managers, the low grade is a significant portion of their annual throughput, upwards of 75% of what they do. So for the region that supplies it, it's heavily significant, highly significant. And a statewide, it's less so, only because of the geography. I hope that makes sense. So for those who deliver to it, it's bread and butter. And for a volume of a low grade material that just doesn't exist, the markets for it don't exist elsewhere.
I appreciate that. We heard that testimony last year. 8% is significant, so is 40%. So if you could help us understand a little bit more clearly by writing or something, an email later, I'd be great.
Bring up some numbers, that basically the statewide harvesting numbers annually, and then what the throughput at this facility is, and you'll get a sense it's a significant portion of it. So perhaps one of the witnesses could repeat. It was mentioned earlier, the total annual throughput in volume is what? How many tons? Does someone have that? I think that was mentioned.
I can get that.
No, I put that in. If you could repeat it, I could put it in context.
I think we're all waiting for you. Do you have that, or Mr. Harrington?
I thought
No.
Dylan, Mr. Zwicky, didn't you mention that?
Yes, so I have a 3-year total, and it's not easily surmised. Let me give me a few minutes and I can get it for you.
And I'll give you my piece. Statewide, the total harvest of the state annually is in the range of 2 to 2.25 million tons, I would say. So that'll frame up. That's the total Vermont harvest, all converted to tons. And you'll get a sense from the number you hear here that that's a significant figure within the total harvesting of the state. I hope that helps, Senator Pearson.
I think last year it was clear that especially in the counties, which tend to be counties that are not thriving economically, Orange and Caledonia, that this was a real economic necessity, which was one of the reasons for going forward. But we'll put that on, and if you don't have it, you can get it, Senator Hardy, and then Senator McDonald.
One of the questions we asked.
No, Senator Hardy first, Senator McDonald. She's still got the
My
floor.
apologies.
Okay.
Thank you, senators. Commissioner Schneider, you know how much I love trees, and you know how much I love carbon sequestration and storage. So if we cut these trees down for this purpose, what are we giving up in the realm of carbon sequestration and storage and the ability to moderate climate change?
Fair enough. Starting at what we give up, in fairness, you cut a tree down and you burn it, you put that carbon that was stored in the tree back into the atmosphere. So you're giving up that, but what you're getting in exchange, on balance and in totality, is a forested landscape that can be continued forever, and as opposed to converting to non-forest, which would be a significant net loss in climate mitigation. Furthermore, you're also substituting and replacing for fossil fuels that would otherwise be used to generate electricity. And so If you're looking just at the stump, it's a loss of the power of sequestration in that tree, but it would be on balance considered as a management tool of a renewable fuel source to keep forests and continue the climate benefits that they provide. And you have this additional ability to offset or replace what would otherwise be provided by fossil fuels. So thereby creating the first step in a series of win-wins, I would suggest. And it goes on from there.
So can I connect the dots on your first point of the keeping forests? Is what you're saying that the ability to harvest means that we wouldn't then get rid of these forests and develop them instead? Is that what argument you're making? So that if we're getting some economic value out of the forest, it's more likely that we'll keep it as a forest. We, society, the big we, is that?
Yes. One component of the response and the justification, I would say, for considering wood energy, efficient, sustainable uses of wood in both electric and thermal applications is a significant part of the plan for adapting to climate change, to mitigating atmospheric CO2, and having a modern energy economy that contributes to the overall economy and is in a climate smart way. So by keeping forests, by having that economic mechanism in the real world, that's important to keep forests. But there's also there's even more to it, Senator, that I think beyond just that offsetting of a loss of forest land and contributing to that, there are ways to actually, through management, to enhance the ability of a forest to both sequester and store and to adapt to climate change and pest and invasive problems, et cetera. For example, we have a problem with emerald ash borer. The facility actually can play a really significant role, given that burning the infested wood is really one of our best ways to eliminate its spread. So it just got many fingers here, and it connects in many different ways. That begins, I was saying, with the role as an economic incentive to keep forest for all the values they provide, and then it goes from there and more granular as we go. And I could continue, and I'm happy to.
I've heard it. I just wanted to give you a chance to make this argument again. I've heard from you before, but it's a continued concern of mine. And I also, is there a replanting provision as part of this? Is that part of the general forest management plan? If these trees are harvested, are there replanting provisions?
Well, we're very lucky here that it's very rare that we have to go to that. We can, but we prefer to employ silvicultural techniques that allow natural regeneration. We're blessed with the ability to do that here, and unlike some other forest types in the country. So we depend on intelligent tinkering with the canopy and the various layers of the forest to stimulate new forest growth in a natural way that seeds in sprouts, et cetera, without planting. But when those natural regenerations fail, say in the current use program, you don't meet a minimum stocking in regeneration after your harvest. We do, and in fact have required people to plant when the natural regeneration approaches fail. But we are lucky, and that's the whole premise of being able to manage these repeatedly in ecologically sound ways. And now more and more in ways that enhance complexity, old growth characteristics in forests using new, adaptive silvicultural techniques, frankly, many of which are being developed right here in the state.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And then I have another question for Dylan or Mr. Zwicky. The provision about, you mentioned the possibility of this shrimp plant as a means for using some of the extra heat generation. And if that doesn't go through, is there a backup plan, or is that something that would be as part of this, the infamous study?
Yes, so thank you for the question. We are, as I mentioned, my client and Bill is here today, is very interested in developing a use for that heat. If the shrimp farm, for one reason or another, does not play out, what we have done is we've drafted some language that I shared with Luke earlier today that would essentially put the onus on the owner and operator to conduct a feasibility study, report back to the Department of Public Service, who would then report back to the legislature on the status and feasibility and what might or could be done to develop a project at that location. So yes, there's a backup plan, and we're comfortable with that.
Okay, we just haven't seen that language yet. Okay, thank you.
Happy to share with the committee.
Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, last year we asked for some figures on how much of the wood supply came from New Hampshire, Maine, and how much came from Vermont. And I think when we adjourned, we were still waiting for those numbers. But are we passing this extension in cooperation with New Hampshire that's picking up some of the tab for the subsidy of this plant? Or are we doing this all on our own and accepting chips from Maine and New Hampshire?
To the best of my knowledge, this
Oh,
is just Vermont.
I thought maybe Commissioner Snyder would have a.
Commissioner Snyder.
I can speak to it, Madam Chair, if you'd like. I'm not,
Yeah.
if perhaps you could get clarity on the question that is being asked. I'm happy to try.
Vermont ratepayers are being asked to pick up the tab to subsidize this industry. That's a legitimate discussion. For, folks from, the chair said, from Caledonia and Orange are eager to give every benefit of the doubt. To what extent are the subsidies that we are providing to forest harvesters in New Hampshire and Maine being picked up by the ratepayers or taxpayers in New Hampshire and Maine?
Well, I think it's actually raises a really important point to consider through all this. One, several points. One is the subsidy is based on the renewability of the fuel and the importance, and that should be seen in the context of other renewable subsidies as well. And I think you'll see, perhaps my colleague at Public Service Ed McMahon will shed light on this. I think there's a favorable comparison there. But to the point of the interstate sourcing of the fuels, indeed, it's basically a border facility, and so its woodshed includes jurisdictions outside Vermont. And to me, the importance here is to recognize that it's important and reasonable, but we have no jurisdiction there. And so for example, the Fish and Wildlife notification requirement as a CPG condition doesn't apply to those fuel sources. So they can buy it there without that, and any subsidy that protects the facility against wholesale price problems. I think traditionally that's been seen as somewhat, if you'll pardon the phrase, trickling through the forest economy, through the landowners, the loggers. And that's the important thing here, is in that when we put restrictions on them or ask them to do it, there's a cost to that. And so passing the savings, if you will, or the incentive on would be important for us. And we've said that before, and recognize that when that's not the case and across the river. And so a level playing field is an important thing for Vermont landowners, loggers, participants in our forest economy.
Okay, Senator.
Thank you, Commissioner Snyder.
So I'm trying to follow this. So the responsible foresting, harvesting provision here that sort of is hinged to the CPG, that's only for harvesting in Vermont. Is that what I'm understanding?
Right. I think, perhaps Mr. Martland could explain it better than I, but I believe we run afoul of interstate commerce clause issues when trying to control pricing of, across the river. So that's just not able to do it. I mean, we're, I think, proud of, is what Commissioner Porter said. They have a longstanding situation. It's handled well. And, we should be proud of that. But I think we need to recognize that it unlevels the playing field, and we need to be mindful as we move ahead.
So it could be clear cut wood coming from New Hampshire, but sustainably harvest here when it's wood that's coming from Vermont.
They cannot purchase Vermont wood without notification and approval by Fish and Wildlife, right? And that doesn't exist for wood coming from New Hampshire.
Okay, Mr. Harrington, I think may have some.
Yes, I think and first of all, I'm very honored to be in front of your committee. My name's Bill Harrington. I feel very akin to Vermont because my great grandfather was buried there, and never found his grave, but I found his mother's grave up in Highgate. But in any case, I've been to the plant many times, and I've met with several of the larger suppliers in Vermont. First off, our forester, Tyler, who handles the forestation in Vermont, also uses the same practices for the Rygate plant in New Hampshire that he would use in Vermont. He goes out and looks at every job and sees it through the same lens. Whether or not it's regulatorily required, I don't know, but in practice, that does take place. The other thing that I'd like to point out is we have always and will always give first preference to Vermont producers over everyone. In several cases of some of your Vermont producers, since we own plants in New Hampshire as well, they have asked us if to keep their businesses sustained in Vermont, if they could take some of their overages and if we would take them in the New Hampshire plants to assist in their business, and we have. So I think there is more reciprocality than what you would normally think. I mean, you do have some material that is coming from New Hampshire that's harvested from Vermont producers. You also have some of the Vermont, let's say slash or tops or limbs, if they're overages, that producers in Vermont have asked us, would you please take this in some of your New Hampshire plants that are along that line, particularly Whitefield. So happy to answer any questions of the committee, but just wanted to say in practice, we do not clear cut anything. And we have our forester look at every harvest that comes to Rygate, whether it's New Hampshire or Vermont, through the same lens.
Try and move us along. Senator Pearson, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I appreciate hearing from Mr. Harrington directly. Help us understand. I mean, you bought this plant at a time when there is no long-term security in its operation. So, absent this bill, am I right? You'd be free to operate and to sell power on the spot market, but that what you're really hoping for is the dependability of this 10-year contract. Do I have that right?
Well, obviously, in any kind of business decision to buy a plant, you evaluate the options. Any prudent businessman does. And this plant, because of its cost structure, probably can't exist as a merchant plant. But in our evaluation of the plant, you've got to look prudently at two options. One would be hoping that the state of Vermont renews the PPA that creates the longevity in the plant. The other is obviously the fact that there is a demolition fund. And, we bought this as a portfolio of plants. And I'm one of those people that believes that biomass is a very good long-term baseload renewable energy source that goes on when the wind doesn't blow, when the sun doesn't shine, but I'm a believer in solar and wind as well. We're looking at maybe a solar addition with some batteries at the Rygate plant. But, the alternative, we recognized going in that there is a demolition fund and that, you can repurpose something to farm field again. You don't want to. That's not our goal. And don't take that as any kind of a threat. I'm not at all. It's just as a prudent businessman, we recognize there are two options, and those would really rest in your hands.
Thank you.
Senator Bray, I think you're starting to cut into your break, guys. I've got two more
Okay.
witnesses.
No fun.
Well, the question I have is about heat rate. I don't know if anyone who's in the room now could talk about the efficiency of this plant.
In the case of a biomass plant, it is a very efficient plant. It's probably the most efficient plant in the portfolio that we have. But one of the reasons that we, first off, our European partner has been in the business for 40 some years, and they've built in 40 some countries. And they've always been big proponents in putting in fish farms, in greenhouses, in the things that make plants more efficient. Is the heat rate as good as you would have in a natural gas fossil fuel reciprocal engine? No. It's going to be somewhere, my guess would be in the 12 to 13,000 BTU per kilowatt range. I'm not a guy that would rattle off exact statistics like in wood supply. I'm sure Dylan has the exact figures, but probably 250,000 tons of wood per year. It goes through the plant, but the reason for wanting a shrimp farm or other co-hosts is to make the plant more efficient.
Okay. Well, I was thinking of the simpler efficiency rating. When someone say, well, it's roughly 28%, energy in, energy out. That I don't know if that's if that's the neighborhood you're operating in.
I believe it would be higher than that. I think it would be more in the 30 to 35% range, but I would have to look into calculations and get back to you with a specific answer.
Okay. And was there ever any consideration to go into combined heat and power, or it's not a viable choice for that location?
Well, typically a combined heat and power would incorporate a thermal loop that would go out to a city or a town or whatever. And to some degree, co-hosting with a shrimp farm is combined heat and power, because you're really taking the waste heat and you're putting it to a productive use. But from the standpoint of it being close enough to a town to put in a thermal loop, it probably does not, it's not in a location that would be very good for a pure combined heat and power plant.
Sure. No, I was just asking, because the heat load, the load for the shrimp farm, could be the loop, that sort of thing. But so thank you.
Snyder, and then we still have Ed McNamara and Doug Smith and a whole amendment to discuss. So.
Sorry, Madam Chair, were you recognizing me? I
Yes.
cut out for. Thanks. That would be real quick. Just hearing that, I thought I'd follow up for Senator Pearson's benefit. So at 250,000 tons coming through this facility a year, that's about 13% of Vermont's total harvest, which I would say is a pretty significant number. I just try to give you some perspective there. You seem to be looking for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on now to Ed McNamara from the Department of Public Service. And is he here? Okay. My little blocks are jumping and flashing all over the place. I found you. Okay.
Ed McNamara, Planning Director for Department of Public Service, and I did put together some slides and hope to touch on some of the questions and see if this works. Great. So you should be able to see now S1 Rygate energy considerations.
Yes, that's up.
All right. So just going to cover a couple things. We're the energy nerds. We're not here to talk about the forest. We're more thinking about how this fits in with Vermont's overall power supply portfolio, excuse me, and potential impact to ratepayers. Excuse me. One of the most significant considerations is that this bill doesn't set a contract price, it sets a process. The PUC, this wasn't happening until I started testifying. The PUC will hold a proceeding that'll be transparent, litigation. Utilities will be involved, the department, Forest and Parks, any interested stakeholder can intervene. So a very transparent process for setting the rate. The key component for us in the modification to the bill is paragraph 7, which there's a couple of questions on. And that's essentially looking at potentially modifying the dispatch of the plant to be cognizant of what's happening with wholesale energy prices, while also not interfering with the operation of the plant. And I know, Senator Bray, you had a question about that in particular. Older steam units, or even, this isn't necessarily an older steam unit, but steam units, you can't just ramp up or down consistently over and over and over again. There's a lot of wear and tear on the operation and maintenance, can significantly shorten the life. So that's what we meant by that last part about respecting the physical operating parameters. You don't want to break the unit by trying to cycle it with the wholesale markets. Wholesale markets operate or change every 5 minutes. Definitely not recommending that. What we're thinking about is in May, late April through early June, when there's a lot of hydro, a lot of solar production in New England, energy prices tend to be at the lowest, and Rygate ought to be doing its annual maintenance during that period, shut down for a couple of weeks during that period, when the price differential between the contract and the wholesale energy price is the largest. That's in a nutshell what we're talking about there. There's a lot of nuance involved in that that'll be brought up in front of the PUC. And then fixed costs of the proposed plant, that's in recognition of the fact that the bill is essentially saying pay for the operation of the plant. Make sure that the plant is actually economic to run, or is getting paid sufficient funds to run. Another key component of Rygate as well is that it helps provide diversity for a renewable mix. This is one of only a few baseload renewable power plants within Vermont. Oops. So here's the
Chair,
in-state
do you want us to hold questions?
No, I just can't see you, so just holler.
Okay.
So you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. McNamara. So on this number 7 that's in italics here in the middle, I get the whole idea. You can't ramp up and down. So you're going to operate up and down is going to be much slower than some other plants in the portfolio or whatever. And then the way it works though, in terms of pricing, basically they get the ISO clearing price, and what we're looking at, the cost is what we're trying to figure out is that now you're going to get a guaranteed price set through standard offer, but it's going to may well be higher than the clearing price, and somebody's going to make up that difference. Is that what's going on here?
Essentially, yes. And during winter months, when the wholesale price is higher than the contract price, Rygate only gets the contract price. They don't get that $168 during the wintertime as well. So they get a set amount for every megawatt hour, and any fluctuations up or down, primarily up likely, is going to be borne by Vermont ratepayers.
And when their price is lower than the clearing price, who's picking up the value of getting that, at that moment, cheaper power? The utilities that must purchase it?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. So in other words, when they're not being dispatched and there's a lower price out, or when they're—
No, sorry.
Yep.
Right. Well, your example was the price is high, there's a lot of demand. They're not getting that higher clearing price. They're still stuck at the contract price. Is the value to the utilities that they are now purchasing cheaper than market priced power through this contract?
Yes, that's correct. When wholesale energy prices are $168, the Vermont utilities are instead buying energy for $100.
Right.
And so, $68 difference, utilities get that, and then basic rate regulation, that has to flow through back to ratepayers.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. McNamara, maybe you can help us. It might help, especially for the new people, probably for all of us. we did this program, standard offers, I'm remembering it, because we wanted to encourage renewable energy. But to do that, they had to build solar panels and wood, and they could not compete in the market with lower price fossil fuels or existing hydro. And so the standard offer was to give them the financial stability to be able to go out to the market, get the loans, build the facilities. And it was over a number of years so that their financial planning would work. Am I remembering that correctly?
That is correct. And another important component is, Luke was correct. It was 2009 when standard offer first came into effect. And that was pre-renewable energy standards. So there is no requirement on the utilities to purchase any renewable power. There is no requirement that they go out and do RFPs on their own and procure resources on their own. And so instead, this was an attempt to say, or actually, no, I apologize. There were requirements that the utilities go out and do long-term power contracts with renewable resources. That's how Kingdom Community, Sheffield, Wind, other projects got built. However, standard offer, and I think of Rygate as outside of standard offer, it uses the same terminology, but the main part of the standard offer program is 127.5 megawatts that need to be procured, and those projects have to be under or 2.2 megawatts or below. And so standard offer was meant to, in 2009, address the fact that utilities were going out and building large projects at scale or contracting for large projects at scale. They weren't going out and procuring distributed generation. And again, this is prior to renewable energy standard and the tier 2 requirement. Okay.
I'm not hearing anyone.
Madam Chair,
Okay. Yes.
I think the witness is correct in saying that standard offer is in the title of this plan, but it's not in the spirit of what standard offer was. We hear often about how utilities pay 30 cents a kilowatt hour for solar power, which they did when we gave them a standard offer for a very, very minute sliver in order to jumpstart the solar power, much the way that the Rygate plant was originally jump-started about 30 years ago. But within 3 or 4 or 5 years of the standard offer of solar, we reverted to going to bid. And the only people that could bid for a standard offer project that got a bid were the ones who were able to bring it in at the lowest possible price. And I appreciate the arguments and made by foresters, but after 20 years, Vermont declined to renew the contract on this plant, or at least the Natural Resources Committees did, after 20 years of operation, when the state and the ratepayers subsidized it to see if it was a good idea. And many of us were surprised that somehow it into statute went language, which had it operate for another 10 years. So that's where we are. And it's either subsidize it because it's good for the local economy, but and that's a decision. But as you do not build new wood facilities to make electricity. If you build them to heat things, and this is backwards. And this thing keeps coming home to roost, Madam Chair. I used to run a shrimp boat for 6 years, and it's kind of amusing to see a shrimp boat. I see a shrimp farm in Rygate, but who knows what's possible? Freshwater shrimp.
Oh. Okay, I've got to move us along because we still have the treasurer coming in, and after this, you are definitely going to need a break. And we're down to like 15 minutes. I think we're going to have to put off any further discussion. I'm going to cut us off around after Mr. We've got one more. We'll go through Doug Smith, but the treasurer also is hard to get on time. So, Ed, can you finish up, and then we'll do Doug Smith, and then we will get back and discuss the proposed amendments at another time. Okay?
I will move through pretty quickly. So this slide is simply showing what in-state renewable resources we have. I mentioned before baseload. And so there's a total of 86 megawatts baseload compared to 350. So, over 800 megawatts of intermittence. Nothing wrong with intermittence at all. Baseload can be it's just a different type of resource, can be helpful. So high level, there's been some discussion about cost differential. What is Rygate producing? Energy, megawatt hours. So baseload produces, energy prices tend to be relatively low in the last couple of years, and we project them to continue to be low, except for when there's really cold weather. So in the wintertime is when prices tend to be pretty high. Capacity is essentially the ability to have a resource available during the peak hour in the entire year. Because Rygate is dispatchable, it has very good capacity value. Regional capacity prices have plummeted in the last couple of years, and we expect them to remain relatively low. And then sounds like we're going to do a REX 101 sometime in the near future. Basically, this plant does produce high quality RECs, but they're only high quality for Connecticut and a couple other states. They actually have very little value in Vermont because of the structure of the renewable energy standard. Also, REC prices are probably the most volatile of the ones on the screen here. So, high level, Rygate's existing contract is 10.3 cents or $103 per megawatt hour. Our department's forecasted overall market prices are $74 a megawatt hour over the next 10 years. This just breaks it down. Energy is the largest, then RECs, and capacity is a relatively low price. Oops. But this slide in particular, I've mentioned winter prices. You can see this is monthly average price. So this doesn't account for individual 5-minute variations where prices can jump up really high. So this is essentially, if you look at this, May and June tend to be the lowest prices during the year. That's why the department thinks long-term scheduled outages should be during that time period. November, December, January, February, even parts of March, that's when this plant has the most value overall. This is a screenshot from just last Friday, showing prices were about $170, $160 per megawatt hour in the region. It was 8 degrees in Boston, Hartford, which is most of the regional load, 7 degrees in Montpelier. So that was 10 o'clock in the morning. Capacity prices I mentioned, right now they're relatively high. It's a forward procurement, 3-year forward procurement. So we know prices are going to be through 2024, through the beginning of summer 2024. So you can see the capacity value is actually declining over time. And then this is REC prices. Right now, they're just over $40. We expect them to settle down. We'll talk all about REC prices sometime in the next week or two. And then to what Senator McDonald mentioned earlier, this is a chart that shows resources not that were contracted for by utilities, but instead where state said, you shall go out, PUC set the price and go make sure the utilities buy this. So standard offer wind, small wind, that's under 100 kilowatts. That price is about 25.8 cents, all the way down to McNeil. That actually doesn't really belong on the chart. Rygate's just over 10. Standard offer solar, as Senator McDonald said, the prices right now tend to be fairly low for standard offer solar for new projects. However, a different way of looking at this is look at the total megawatt hours produced, the total dollars, and then the average. So Rygate, and this is 2019, so I could do an apples to apples comparison. Just about 131 megawatt hours produced for the entire year at a cost of a little over 13 million. Standard offer, this includes the 30-cent solar all the way down to the existing. This is only the standard offer projects that have actually been built and are running. So 112,185 megawatt hours, a little over $22 million. Net metering, 278,000 megawatt hours and about $57 million. So just wanted to give that for relative comparison. I know that Senator McDonald did not like the prior chart in Senate Natural Resources a few weeks ago, so I'm trying to give a different perspective.
Thank you.
So that's what I had. Tried to do it quick.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to move right along to Doug Smith. Commissioner Schneider, I'm going to assume that you've had your day in court here. So, Mr. Smith, I'll give you a few minutes and then we'll come back to this.
Hi, folks. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Just as a preface, my role here today was going to be to introduce just a few amendments that I think are considered supportive by the witnesses that have been speaking earlier. So my impression listening to this is that what you may want to have occur here, I don't know, is have me come back. If that's helpful to move things,
I think,
I'm glad to do that.
I think there's been a lot to absorb this afternoon, especially for folks, even for those of us who went through this last year. Yeah, I wanted to make sure you had a chance because you gave us your time and have been here. But if you can come back, then we can talk about the amendments and maybe see if the committee can come up with some questions, and we'll set up time to get those specific questions answered.
Okay. That sounds real good.
Okay.
And my own sense listening to the dialogue is that a quick rush here on the amendments wouldn't be as productive as taking a little bit longer, where we might be able to address some of the committee's questions just more. So that's.
I mean, we never know how many questions and how long it's going to take. And we came up short a few times and today we were long, but so I thank you for cooperating. Commissioner Schneider, did you have anything to add?
Well, yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just to be clear, I'm happy to, I feel I was here to help and answer questions for sure, and I've done that to some extent. Happy to do that. But just to be clear, I have not put on the record, say, our position on S1. I'm happy to come back anytime to answer other questions or kind of be more clear about that. But in fairness, I didn't actually do that. I just answered some questions.
Okay.
All good, just to be clear.
That is a fair request. We'll get you on first next time.
As you wish. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, committee. I'm trying to find a screen. It is 3:03. We have the commissioner at 3:15. The commissioner, the treasurer. And her time is, we've already had to juggle the agenda to get her here. So please be back by 3:15. Please, everybody, remember, if you do not shut off your audio and your video, as we found out yesterday, anything you say or do goes out live over live feed. So make sure you shut everything down until you're back. Okay, do it this way.
You're muted, Madam Chair.
Okay, there we all are. Okay. And I'll bring my agenda back up here. Okay. We are waiting for Commissioner Pierce to join us.
Treasurer Pierce is right here.
Ah, there you are. Hi, Beth.
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Good, good. I don't see you anymore. No VSAC meetings.
Oh, I know. It's still get involved in the audit committee and the finance committee, the real exciting ones. So
We lost David, so
yeah,
we
I
haven't
know.
had a human resources meeting in a while.
Ah, well,
Need
David,
new chair.
there you go. Well, hey, I hear you could volunteer.
Yeah, I got all that free time.
Okay.
I'm lucky to make the meetings.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough, it's a big commitment, so, but
It is.
yeah, it's a good program.
It's a good board and it's a
It
good,
really is.
it's a good organization. I
Yeah.
enjoy it.
Yeah.
Okay, so committee. Guess what we want to talk to you about, Treasurer Pierce?
Yes.
Unclaimed property?
Yeah, unclaimed property. That's a hot item this year. So maybe, I think, the thing on pensions kind of hit us out of the blue. So maybe some background as to how did we get here? I mean, what's happening? Why is this such a surprise?
Okay, we have a presentation. We sent over the report and a PowerPoint, and I see Ashlyn is on. My technical skills are less than zero, so perhaps she could put the.
Either she can, or if you send it over, Faith can. But
yes, I can do it. It looks like Faith is allowing me to share my screen. So one moment, I'll pull that up.
That's good.
And Ashlyn, if we can make that as large as possible, because I know folks have said in the past that they have a little trouble reading it. So there you go.
This is good right now.
Excellent, excellent. Well, before we start, let me put a little bit of perspective on it to answer your question, Senator. We've actually started talking about this in 2019, and we had a series of meetings. We had talked to various legislative leaders, and members of the Senate GovOps and PROPS, as well as the House and GovOps and Appropriations were invited to attend some meetings that we had with the employer groups, with the administration, with our actuaries, and it was basically moderated by an outside party to have a question, and we called it a risk assessment. And we went through a process of looking at what are the risks in the portfolio and how to mitigate those risks. And we produced, for instance, in November 1st, a list of ideas. It was it's sort of like the old analogy, throwing spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. It was just a around the room kind of thing. We then got into some more discussions, and we ended up having to move off of that process when COVID began. So we were into March when we were still taking a look at possible options to include in, for instance, the appropriations bill. And frankly, it was getting too late to incorporate those. And certainly the General Assembly had a very critical focus at that point in time. We then had an experience study, which we do every 5 years, and took a look at the actuarial assumptions. When you do evaluation, you look at assumptions, and the actuary makes assumptions, or actually the board approves assumptions, the boards of trustees, and the VPIC in the case of rate of return, along with the board of trustees, based on an actuarial process called an experience study. So they're validating the assumptions used in evaluation, mortality, how long will people live in retirement, rate of return, turnover, for instance, how many retirees do we expect, salaries, cost of living, all different types of assumptions. Some of them are what we call experience, such as turnover. Some are demographics, such as mortality. Some are economics, such as cost of living, inflation, and the rate of return. So those assumptions are built into the valuation, which you hear about from us every year about what that unfunded liability looks like and what the percentage of funding is for the state, the teachers. And we also do this for the municipal system. Although in the case of the municipal system, the employers, the municipalities and other participating entities are the employer that makes the contribution. So this doesn't impact our appropriations. So this year we trued up those assumptions in what's called an experience study. And in the process of doing that, we saw, particularly in the teachers system, a number of experience changes. For instance, the turnover of staff, the number of retirements, as well as investment returns on both the state and the teachers system. The teachers system, about 50-50. So 50% of the increase in the unfunded liability was related to demographic assumptions, and about 50% for investment rate of return and economic assumptions. In the state system, it was about 30 on the demographics and about 70 on the return assumption. When you do those, you project what you think is going to be the impact. And then from there, you do an annual valuation, which is essentially the impact. And as a result of that, we had some significant changes in the unfunded liability. And if you go to the first page, Ashlyn, this is the state system. And you see that in 2019, the valuation, so the 2019 valuation impacts the 2021 budget. And obviously, following that same logic, the 2020 valuation affects the 2022 budget. And you see that in 2019 valuation, the unfunded liability was $815 million. We were at 70.7% funded. We then, on the basis of the experience study and the subsequent valuation, it went up to $1.040 billion. So we were talking about a $225 million change when we were all done with this. And a little off on that, excess of 200 million. And you see that the unfunded liability went to 66.4%. Substantial change. If you look back to 2007, you would see that the state system was fully funded. It was at 100.8, and it went into the Great Recession and took a hit. And you see in 2009, 2010, and 2011, you see some impacts of that. In the high 70s or in one case the low 80s. And then we expected to move forward with some increase in the percentage. And you see that, in fact, the percentage has gone down from 77.7 to 76 to 75 to 74 to 70 and now 66.4%. So part of the look back in 19 was a look under the hood and see why and what things needed to be done. And then the experience study exacerbated that funding position and brought some of the same issues that we were looking at in 2019 to the surface, excuse me. So I want to stress that this is not a one-time piece. This is something that we've been working on for a while. And again, we did invite members of the General Assembly to participate in that process. If you go to the next page, this is the teacher system. And you'll notice that in 2007, coming into the Great Recession, it was less well-funded than the teachers. And as opposed to 100.8, it was 84.9%. A lot of that had to do with the the lack of funding from the state, or the lack of appropriate funding from the state from 1990 to 2007, underfunding of what's called the ADEC. It used to be called the ARC, the Actuarially Required Contribution. It's now changed under GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board. I got a lot of acronyms here to the ADEC, the Actuarially Determined Employer Contribution. And if you go back to the previous chart for just a minute, Ashley, and you see again that we're now down to 51.3. And my real fear is that in subsequent valuations, particularly during the COVID period and what's happening in terms of teacher retirements, that you could well get into the 40s, into the 48, 49%. And you're running dangerously. You're running into danger here. You're running into a precarious situation. The Government Accountability Office states that 80% is a well-funded plan. The Society of Actuaries would say, yes, 80% is a well-funded plan, but you should have a process and a plan to go to 100. And as you can see, we're neither at 80% at this point, nor are we heading in the right direction. So now if you go to the next page, this is a state system again. So you see the 815. Okay, there it is. 1,040,5. And you take a look at the changes here, the estimate with the experience study and where we are, it's roughly 225 million. I think we're probably off 225 million change in the unfunded liability. So that means that that the ADEC, the Actually Determined Employer Contribution, has to increase, because that's used to pay down the unfunded liability over time out to 2038. We characterize this as sort of like a mortgage. You have an unfunded liability that you need to pay down over time, and the time period set in statute is 2038. So each year we send a recommendation to you based on our actuarial valuation that makes a request on what that appropriation should be. In 2019, the val for the 2021 budget, that was 83.9. And it's now going up to 119.9. We're talking about a $36 million increase in the appropriation for the state system. If you go to the next page, you see that the teachers, you were at 1.5 billion with in the 2019 valuation, and it's gone up to $379 million of an increase in the unfunded liability. And that, again, impacts the amount of money you need to contribute. And we went from 135.6 million in the 2020 budget, 21 budget, to 196.2 million, or an increase of $60.6 million in appropriation. So if we were not to make any changes, the result would be a requirement between the two of an additional $96.6 million in appropriation by the General Assembly. And this is not a one-time appropriation. It's roughly 100 million now. Next year it will go up a little because this is backloaded at 3% increases after adjusting for payments to the principal. Right now we're paying practically all interest payments, so it's going to go up. And we took a look at the schedule and what was presumed to be the need in 2038 and 2037. At this pace, it would be over $500 million between the two systems. So right now it's 300 and some change. When you get out to 2030, I believe, I don't have that number in front of me, but going from memory, roughly $400 million. And then we're getting into the $500 million range at the end of this payment period. That's something that the boards, the retirement boards, the boards of trustees, which are made up of members of the administration, members of the employee groups, as well as the treasurer. So I'm on all three, the state, the teacher, and municipal boards of trustees. And all three boards were concerned about, well, all three boards, but two in particular that we're dealing with the state appropriations. Again, the state and the teachers board directed the treasurer to take a look at the ways to reduce the unfunded liability back to its 2021 levels and to reduce the ADEC back to our 2021 levels. And again, reduce this by 604 million combined between the two systems and 96.6 million for the ADEC. So these were motions passed by both boards, and with a direction to complete that study by January 15th and to submit that to the board and to the General Assembly. You know, what I would say with this is if we were looking at the issues in 2019 and saying the 815 million is high and creates budgetary pressures, and we were looking in 19 to lower that number from 815 in the 1.5 billion. That's in the rear view window right now, because we're looking and saying, how do we get to take care and mitigate the 1.9 in the 1.04 billion increases? So if you go to the next page, we took a look at a number of items. This is not a comprehensive list. We actually did over 35 scenarios and tests with each system, working with our actuaries. And we looked at various scenarios, increasing employee contributions, various changes to COLA. Now, this is a tough one. We have subsequent, I'll talk about some of the other options we've looked at since the report, because the report is the dynamic document that we're continuing to take a look at other scenarios and ways to address this issue. But COLA, frankly, is the area that has the most impact on the unfunded liability. We also looked at increasing the average final compensation, which is in the state visa system, the state employees. Group F, which is almost all of them. Group C is law enforcement, and Group D are the judges. We took a look and said, if you increase the number of years, right now it's your 3 consecutive highest salaries that are used to come up with an average final compensation. That plus a formula, for instance, at this point now, 0.167 times the number of years of service, you to calculate your benefit in retirement. And that formula, by the way, has changed over the years. We took a look at vesting. You know, right now it's a 5-year vesting period. That we found out, by the way, had no impact. It seemed a little counterintuitive to us, but when we looked at this back in 2009 and 10 with our previous actuary, we came to the same, both came to the same conclusion. We took a look at rule of 7 or 87 or rule of 90, which means either age 65 with the teacher system, or rule of 90. And for the state system, for employees that were hired after 7/1/08, it is again rule of if I hope Erica is on the call, so if I get this wrong, but a combination of years of service and age that gets you to 87. And this applied to the individuals that were hired on or after 7/1/08. Prior to that, it's age 62 and 30 years of experience to get to normal retirement. We took a look at early retirement, folks that retire prior to their normal retirement, and took a look at whether or not the formulas that we currently use are using the correct actuarial equivalents. You want to have an actuarial reduction for every year that you retire prior to normal retirement. We looked at changes to the maximum benefit. Right now, it's 50% in the of your AFC in the state system. It's 60% for some folks in the teacher system, and other numbers depending on the your hire date. We took a look and said that, if you have dedicated revenues that we could apply to this, federal COVID dollars would be wonderful. And what I'm understanding right now is at least the proposal that the president has put out there, there's about $350 billion of local and state aid that has very little strings attached to it. So as you know, most of the money we received prior to that were for dedicated sources and not for revenue replacement. We also took a look at what some offsetting options might be so that you get some type of gain here versus, but at the same time still meeting that $225 million target and the $379 million target. So if you go to the next page, again, the direction from the treasurers to the treasurer from the boards, and that's listed here. We made in the report several recommendations. Some of them are very general, but important. And the first one is to maintain defined benefit plans. All of you have heard through various members of the General Assembly that we should move to a defined contribution plan. Simply put, defined contribution plans do not provide retirement security. You put your money in, the state puts its money in, and then you invest your own dollars. And when you retire, you have a sum of money that's supposed to last your lifetime, and many people outlive those dollars. In a defined benefit plan, you put in your dollars, the state puts in its dollars, and then we invest those dollars. And 60% roughly is of the benefit that is paid to a retiree is from investment income. Recently, we took a look all the way back to 1998 to present, it was 63%. So that's a big part of it is investments, and it's done by the pension fund. And those investments cost less than if you do it yourself. There's economies of scale. There's something called risk pooling. And frankly, the fees in a DC plan and the mutual funds or other types of funds that you would invest in a DC plan are higher. So that we believe very strongly that you need to maintain a defined benefit plan. The second recommendation was not to make changes to benefits for current retirees. You've retired, you have a benefit in place. It was the treasurer's recommendation, my recommendation, that any benefit changes not apply to current retirees. The third one was to take a look and to continue to fund the actuarially determined employer contribution, the ADEC. I am pleased that the governor included in his budget request to you folks that we continue to fund the ADEC and put aside dollars for that. Again, the issue will be going forward whether there are sufficient dollars to maintain that. But again, we firmly believe that you need to fund that. A lot of the problems that the teachers had, although again, they have compounding problems unrelated to that, is that they were not properly funded from, again, 1990 to 2007. Access COVID monies, if they become available, consider using excess revenues or Federal CARES Act money to establish a reserve. You know, most of the money you would want to lower the principal to put that those dollars in. You know, right now there's a statute that says that at the end of a fiscal year, that if the budget has additional dollars, first you fully fund the reserves, and then 50% of the money that that's surplus after that, 50% of it will go to funding OPEB, the state OPEB, the state's other post-employment benefits, which are healthcare. We could take a look at that, make some changes to that so that it might address all four buckets, i.e. the state and the teachers' health plans and the state and the teachers' pension plans. And looking at creating a pre-funding mechanism for OPEB plans. Last year, we presented a plan to get to that. It did not require a great deal of funds. It unfortunately was derailed for a couple of reasons. One, the administration was not in favor of it. And secondly, when you got to March and the COVID issues, it was not pursued. We have resubmitted information on this in our letters to the appropriations committees and CC'd all the money committees and GovOps, and we are looking to do this, and we believe we can do this in a way that would lower our liabilities on our books by $1.68 billion. And we have made that request, and we're continuing to look at that as a separate bill, hopefully to be done sooner rather than later. If you go to the next page, we propose some options to meet the target. And I want to point out that these options are for discussion only. Since then, we've actually produced other scenarios and other options for consideration, particularly with the VSEA and the Vermont Troopers Association. So the state system, they've worked with us to try to come up with other ideas on this. So this is not the end. And we also recognize that as we send the recommendations over to you, the General Assembly, you folks are going to make the decisions about this. You folks are going to take a look at these options, the scenarios, the various material in our appendices. As I say, we have over 30 different scenarios that we took a look at, and we're looking to work with you, but ultimately a decision from the General Assembly about what that's going to look like. But we created 4 options for discussion. As I said, we've already created a few more that we've had in discussion, but it's still open to working with you, and we're encouraged that the General Assembly is seriously taking up this issue. The first one was very, very tough to even put on piece of paper. I reluctantly put this into the mix. It's painful, and I recognize it's painful, but it immediately meets the target. And you see the targets above, the $225 million for the unfunded liability and $36 million for the ADEC. It met the amount for the unfunded liability. It was just $700,000 less than the ADEC, which is not a significant amount. Again, it's very extreme, and we recognize that. It, just to be very candid, it erodes the purchasing power of people in retirement. We also took a look at recognizing that some individuals are closer to retirement and have made some plans, and said that we will eliminate COLA except for those within 5 years of normal retirement. And you see that the number went from $238 to $116 million in savings. So we're really seeing it cut in half. And that the ADEC went from $35 million savings to 20. So we took a look at other ways to compensate for that. We said that's add 4 years to the AFC, and the average final compensation, that saved $81 million. And took a look at a combination of elements. You see that it goes in the other direction, some cost to that. When you look at all these scenarios and you look at all these components, the sum of the pieces do not equal the whole because they play off of each other. AFC plays against vesting, for instance, or rule of 90, so that you do have some likely decrease when you put those together. We also took a look at rule of 90. Again, that's years of service and age, combination of 90. And we got to a situation where we had over the required targets. So we said, let's take a look at another option. And so we went, if you go to the next page, and we said basically the same option, but we added 2 years to the AFC instead of 4. And you see, we don't quite make it to the targets. You're at 218 million and 34 million. So one thought is the mid-ground, instead of 4, instead of 2, taking a look at 3 years. And that's not on this package, but we're going to take a look at it. And then this was an idea that came from some members of the VSEA, and the suggestion was create a threshold so that the first $24,000 in retirement would have COLA, and then everything after that, the COLA would be eliminated. The idea here is to provide a retirement security net, so to speak, and for individuals that have lower retirement benefits, i.e. people that had lower salaries, give them more protection. And so we put this scenario together. We added in the AFC, the rule of 90, and a contribution by employees of an additional 0.35%. Right now, the majority folks in Group F, which is the majority of the state employees, classified employees, they contribute 6.65, so that would get us to 7%. So that produced, was just shy of the target. To be very candid, we think that there's some merit in that. That said, these are subject to negotiation. You see, these are preliminary, subject to further discussion. And we've come up with some other ideas since then. One, for instance, would be a couple of scenarios that we're talking about where instead of that $24,000 floor, that we would say that everyone would get 75% of the CPI with a floor of 1%. And so we're taking a look at that as an option. We're taking a look at others. And our goal now is to start working with the General Assembly, sending that information to you so that you folks can be involved in making that decision, because frankly, ultimately the legislature, the General Assembly will be putting that into legislation. And we hope that we can get this done now rather than later, because the longer you wait, the more money it costs. We think that this is important for the retirement security, not just this generation, but the next generation and the next generation of teachers and the next generation of state employees. We've got a long-term look at this and saying that we need to have retirement security all the way through the long term for all state employees, all teachers that give so much to our state. One of the other pieces I would say in this is when people say, well, you know, all the retirees go to Florida or something like that. That's incorrect. 78% of state employees, when they retire, stay in Vermont, pay taxes in Vermont, volunteer their services in Vermont, and 75% of teachers do the same thing. The next state is Florida, and the one after that is New Hampshire. But frankly, they are part of our economic generator. We're cognizant of that, and we're trying to find a balance so that we can continue to have these retirement programs, continue to provide reliable income in retirement for generations to come. And if you go to the next page, this is the teacher. And as we worked with the teacher system to be frank, we weren't able to come up with, in discussions with them, other alternatives. We certainly hope that we can have other alternatives as we move forward. We're open to that, and we know that the General Assembly will be as well. So this is a scenario to take a look at what we could do. This would eliminate COLA for all active members, and it would revise the AFC to 7 years and update the rule of 90 to incorporate all employees. When we did the change in 2009, 10, and 11, it didn't affect all the employees, and a contribution increased to 8%. Right now, teachers that are hired prior to 7/1/14 we have a 5% contribution, and those hired are not vested as of 7/1/14 and after have a 6%. So this would increase all to 8%. So if you go to the next page, trustees subsequent to that, so we turned in the report to the boards of trustees. And both boards, so the state and the teachers board, which is again made up of employee representatives, administrative representatives, the treasurer, retiree representatives, and active employees. Each trustee board voted that it had recognized that they received the treasurer's report, and recognized that the ADEC for 2022 and beyond may not be sustainable, and as a result recognizes that changes in the benefit levels to reduce the unfunded liability may be required. And I do not have the votes in front of me, but it was overwhelming majority, and I think it speaks to the issue that time to deal with this is now. The board also directed the treasurer to do another report, and we're working on that for February 22nd. Look at strategies to reduce the pressure on and increase the stability of the ADEC contributions, to again lower the unfunded liability, to look at cost options and how they impact groups by group per member and assess the extent possible of options to affect assume actuarial retirement projections. This is a little hard. Basically, what it's saying is that based on these changes, what do you think is going to happen in terms of the number of retirees, the number of folks that stay in the system? And from an actuarial perspective, it's very difficult to project future behavior. We know that will occur, and we're looking at some types of scenarios that would at least estimate it at certain levels. We are working on this report and expect to finish it on February 22nd. We also are directed to research a range of COLA options, which we are doing. Again, that proposal, again, perhaps of 75% of COLA. And the Vistas board also asked us to take a look at a caveat of a possible phase-in of employee contributions at either 7 or 8%. So we're actively engaged, as this shows, in terms of continuing our contributions with employee groups, continuing to work with our retirement boards, and the retirement boards are the fiduciaries of this fund, both funds, and to work with the General Assembly to come to some conclusion on this. Again, I would encourage you to take a look at it this year rather than down the road. And again, we're looking to transfer some of this review to the General Assembly, because frankly, you will be the decision makers on that. And if you go to the next page, these are just a history of what we've done, over the years and the savings that we've developed by that. And I just want to point out that this is not a flash in the dark here of a new issue. We've been at this since 2010, looking at different options to lower the unfunded liability. And if you added these up and you annualized it appropriately, the savings are over $1.5 billion. So we've done a lot of work. Frankly, mortality, teacher turnover, teacher new hires, teacher retirements, mortality in both systems, salary, investment rate of return, all of those have impacted these funds. And again, when we updated the assumptions to reflect the most recent in all of those cases, some of the mortality tables that were created by the Society of Actuaries hadn't been updated in many, many years. Although we tried to put in a hedge on that so that it would be a less of an impact. And frankly, private retirements had defined benefit plans had a bigger impact than we did. But these are the different. You see, the next couple of pages are the different things that we've done with you, in partnership with you. We can't do these things on our own. We do this in partnership with you and in partnership with our employee groups. And I believe that concludes. If you could go through these, and I think that's. This one again is about accountability. Some of the things that we've done with pension forfeiture, changes in disability, and some of the things that we've worked with you on in the past on that. And if there's one more page. No, the last page I had for the presentations we did to the employee groups is the time to do this is now. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it will increase in costs if we do not act. And secondly, there's a groundswell on folks that would suggest a defined contribution plan. The chair of GovOps, Senate GovOps, said that just the other day that's something that she recognized. We do not want to end up with a defined contribution plan that undermines the security, the retirement security of our members now and in the future. And so to me, the time to act by all of us is now. It's painful. I'd rather not be doing this in a time of COVID. I recognize the hard work that teachers have done, the state employees have done to be on the front lines with COVID. And I'm so proud of our public employees. And if we could do something else but bring this forward, we would, because this is not something that we want to do, but it's necessary. and I'll stop and answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, any questions? Okay. I got Senator Pearson, then Senator Brock, and Senator Hard, and Senator Sirotkin.
This is, I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I feel like an old man. But I was in House Gov Ops in 2007 or 8 when then Treasurer Spalding and the teachers union and all of us went along with upping their increasing their, making those changes. We were going to solve this problem. And you showed us on page 2 or 3 that that's when the fund was at 80%. For the teachers' retirement, the state plan was at 100%. Now, obviously, we had a big recession immediately, and I got to believe that that had an impact.
Yes, it did.
But the direction from that period, when we thought we were solving the problem, to now has been an incredibly steady decline. And I obviously people are living longer, and I understand some of those demographic changes, but I just don't understand how. I mean, it seems as if we were wrong then when we all shook hands and said we've solved this problem, and we've basically not done anything to every time we try to address it, we're wrong. Meanwhile, the stock market's never been stronger. Even in the pandemic, the billionaires are booming. So how does this all square away? And now we're left asking teachers to add 3% to what they're contributing. It's just something seems wrong here. And I how we solve it is one thing, but really understanding, I mean, we're not getting, it seems like, strong enough rate on returns on our investments. I'm really struggling to understand how it's been going in the wrong direction for 12 years. And actually 12 years ago, we stood there shoulder to shoulder and said, we've solved this problem.
Well, a couple of things to your question. Since we did this, let's talk about the teachers system. There have been workforce changes, and there's been discussion about teacher pupil ratios, impacts in terms of the number of retirements. And I actually testified in front of your committee, and I testified in front of GovOps as well, and appropriations that said, when you make workforce changes, when you make reorganization changes, when locals take a look at incentives to ask people to retire, you make changes to the retirement system. I think the analogy I used in front of this committee is that when you press the balloon at this end, in terms of local costs, you expand the balloon at the other end. So I've testified on that many times in front of this committee and other committees. With respect to other assumptions, again, mortality, others, again, 50% of the state's teacher system is related to demographics. In terms of the rate of return, we recognize the stock market is doing really well right now. And you see years when it's 14%, you see years when it's 20%, and then you see years when it's 1%, you see years when it's in a negative position. And our actuaries look at a 30-year rate of average on the retirement rate of return. They're not looking at this year only, because if they did that, it would be short-sighted. We actually are right now in the top quartile in the country on 1, 3, and 5-year performance. 10 years, I'm going to be honest, we lag behind on that, but we are improving on that every single quarter. So we're doing the right things in the investments. We're moving in the right direction. At the same time, across the country, pension plans are lowering their rate of return assumptions, not just our plan, but across the country. And we need to recognize, based on our asset allocation, that where we are in terms of a long-term projection. The actuaries in the investment, I'd like to finish this if I could, Senator. The actuaries and the investment advisor, not the managers. The managers will say, I can get you 12%, I can get you whatever. We don't talk to them about the rate of return for the portfolio as a whole. We talk to our investment advisor, which was NEPC and now it's RVK, and they were a fiduciary to the fund. And between the two, we take a look and we do what's called a cap. They take a look at our assets, our asset allocations, and then they put it into a capital model and then come up with the rates of return that they recommend to the 3 retirement boards and the VPIC, the Vermont Pension Investment Committee. So we have professionals doing that, independent professionals coming up with those numbers. When I hear folks say, well, it should be 8, it should be 7.5, and I say, you know, or 6.5, because we hear a lot of folks say that it should be less than 7. And that's, and you see that across the country. What I say is, well, did you look at our asset allocation? No. Well, if you didn't do that, you haven't done a capital model projection. We use professionals to do that.
But didn't we make an assumption that it was 7.5, and then we brought that down to 7 or something?
That's correct.
But we haven't hit 7. We haven't hit 7.5, right?
We actually did hit 7.5. Hold on. Let me get my glasses on. So as of 9/30/20, our 1 year is 8.6. Our 3 years is 6.6. And our 5 year is 8.1, and our 10 year is 6.8. Now, we are in the top 16% quartile in the country. We are in the top 21 on the 3%, the 3 year, and the top 25 in the 5 year, and 76, unfortunately, in the 10 year. The reality is that that these systems had a more conservative investment coming out of the recession, because when you're at 60% funded, you can't take big risks. And so we tried to modify that over time. If you take a look last year, however, we were at 4% on the 1 year. I took a look at other systems. Another system in this state had 0.8. PRIM, which is a Massachusetts plan, had something in the 2 range, but we had 4% last year. This year we're doing very well. It goes. You have market changes, market cycles, and you have to take a look at your investment return over a longer period of time, not just what's happening in this year.
And on the 10-year measure, which you've just told us is the way to look, we haven't hit our 7, let alone 7.5. You know, for somebody like me, I get a lot of emails from teachers saying, how can you do this? And it's tricky because I feel like what you're telling us is we don't have any choice, and we're just supposed to shrug away the fact that our analysts and the investment choices haven't delivered, and so we got to turn to teachers during a pandemic. You know, it's a lot to ask, I got to tell you.
Okay, well, I would point out that they're looking at the 1, 3, and 5 year. They're looking at our asset allocation going forward. And as you can tell from those numbers, we've made significant changes in our asset allocation. If you looked at our investment portfolio 4 years ago, there is not one manager that's in it today. We've made significant changes. The actuaries recognize that. And again, the 7% return is a reasonable return. I know that some of the states around us have lower return assumptions than that. We think this is reasonable. We think that we're doing things to be in the right direction. We've changed over our portfolio. I think we're doing the right thing.
Okay, got a lot of questions, so I'm going to move on to Senator Brock.
You're on mute, sir.
If the state, Beth, were to do the scenario that seems to be your favorite one at this point of those choices, what could go wrong?
Well, again, that was as we've done it. I think we've created a couple of other scenarios that I think that have some benefits over the 4 that we presented. We'll continue to look at it. But actuarial assumptions are just that. Mortality could change. As you are taking a look at reorganizing your school systems, that can have an impact on retirements. we could have changes in salaries that could have an impact in the state system. In 2010 and 2016, the state did a retirement incentive, incentivizing older year, let me rephrase that, more years of experience, people that were at the higher end of normal retirement, to take an incentive, a cash incentive, to leave state service and retire. That increased the cost of the retirement system. Again, that bubble, you're changing things at the operating side and increasing costs on the retirement side. In addition to that, there were savings assumptions that we would leave 1/3 of the positions open or some number. I'm not, we had two sets of these, as I said, 2009, 10, and 2016. In the 2010, instead of leaving the requisite number of positions open from 2010 to 2014, 543 positions were added according to our June 30th numbers. Now, I'm not going to tell you that those weren't needed positions. I'm not the workforce expert, and I recognize what state employees go through, and I recognize the hard work that they do and the need that we have in so many places. It's not my call. But the bottom line for me is when you make those assumptions and you do that, you have an impact on the retirement system. So we had an additional cost plus an additional cost for those additional positions. These things are things that we have in our control. Some of the economic pieces, the economic cycle, we do not have control over that. We do not have control over mortality. And those assumptions may in fact change. I think that we're in a good position, and I recognize Senator Pierce's comments, but there are no guarantees. What we have added in our recommendations, however, that at a 5-year period or a 7-year period, that we reanalyze, and if we have gains, if we are able to have gains during that period, that we would have 50% of those gains go to the retirement system, the unfunded liability, and 50% of that used to mitigate these changes that we're recommending, or whatever changes the General Assembly makes, so that we are able to go back and say, maybe we change the contribution rates, maybe we change the COLA provisions or the AFC provisions. So we have a provision in our recommendations to do that. And I hope that what you folks finally pass would keep that provision, because I think that's something that would be beneficial to employees.
As we make changes during the course of a year, such as some of those that you mentioned, is the review process of the funding need, does that take into account what we do on an annual basis, or is there some period of time before a recalculation occurs?
Okay, so the experience studies are done every 5 years by statute. We did a mini in 17 when we hired a new actuary. We went from Buck to Siegel. And by statutes every 5 years. I would be in favor of, frankly, changing that to every 3 years. I think that would be helpful, and would ask you to consider that as well. But what happens is you have the assumptions, you set those, and then you do evaluation annually. And it's as of June 30th. And if you look in the report, you'll see gains and losses. So these were the assumptions. And what did you have as a gain against those? And what did you have as a loss against those assumptions? So and that reconciles to the unfunded liability. So we're going to have those, changes. I can't imagine a report where you would have zero variation from those actuarial assumptions. But it's a process that we go through every year and project that. And as you saw in those lead reports, that those are the results of that. And they're as of June 30th of each year.
As you look back, these are discussions that we've been having. Well, I remember the first discussions that I was involved in goes back to 2005 and 2006, when we were largely fully funded.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always a discussion that we were underfunded. And yes, you can see over time what's happened gradually.
Mm-hmm.
Whose fault is that?
Well, I'm not going to assign risk on what happened between 1990 and 2007. I think it was a group mess up, to be very frank, between all parties. And I wasn't here, but when I look at the literature, when I take a look at the memos, there was and I put this in a report that I did in 2017, which I believe is still on our website. What I did was take a look at different memos that were produced in 1990 and 1989, for instance. So there's one from the Joint Fiscal Office that says that we should make changes and not fully fund these because investment returns are going to cover that, which is not a good assumption. And secondly, we need these for operating costs. And that's what I still hear today, that we need this for operating costs, and we should, not make changes and not recognize the need to make changes going forward to fully fund these. There were also pieces from various members of the administration over time. It's a multi-administrations. It's not one administration. I'm just going to be blunt. It's all parties, all legislators, and continuing on. Even though we began to fund, and we did fund the actuarially required contribution, or the ADEC, beginning in 2007, in the teachers plan, we still funded healthcare out of that to 2014. And every year as treasurer, I came to you folks and said, we need to stop doing this, and we need to come up with a plan to do that. We did that. And if you project out what that cost would have been, because it was taking the wind out of the sails of the changes that we made in the investments that we made in the pensions, teachers pension fund, that change saved the taxpayers over time between now, which is millions of dollars each year, into 2038, $480 million. That was another drag on the system, and it was a drag to 2014.
And what I'm actually looking at is that correct. We have a tendency not to want to look back at what we did wrong. But it's imperative that we set up a process to do just that. Otherwise, we're going to be back here again, even if we are able to solve this, with the same problem again of cans being kicked down the road or failure to act when we know we should have acted, which is what this is all about. Well,
I would say that that we need to take a look now. I can't guarantee you that this is going to solve the whole problem. And frankly, I don't believe that anyone can guarantee that. That said, this is the best plan at the time to provide retirement security for our folks, again, not just this generation, but generations to come. We have made mistakes. The retirement incentive did not go as expected. Some of the changes that impacted the teachers plan, whether it's healthcare, whether it's a lack of funding, whether it's some of the reorganization, which is I can't speak to what that did at the local level, but it's an unintended consequence on the state level. All of those things combine to create stresses on the system. Our job is to look at those stresses, to work through those stresses, to make the system more sound, and to work forward to make it to do everything we can to provide retirement security. And I think that that's what we're doing. And again, one of the reasons I strongly recommend a DB system, a defined benefit system, is it provides more retirement security at a lower cost to the taxpayer. And I would be happy to have that conversation. I've debated that several times in the legislature, and would be happy to do that again.
Okay, but not today.
Not today.
Okay, Senator Brock, are you finished?
I am for now.
Okay. I think I had Senator Hardy, then Senator Sirotkin, and Senator Bray, I believe.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Treasurer, for being here with us. I'm sure you feel like a broken record to some extent with this spiel, but it's really helpful to hear straight from you. I have a few questions, just like everyone else. I'm wondering, you said in your presentation that the biggest impact is the COLA. And what is the assumption that you're using? What is the rate that you're using for the COLA in your assumptions?
Okay, well, the COLA assumption in the actuarial report, and I'm going to look at Will Crewald, who's our Chief Financial Officer. I believe it was around 2.3 for one of the systems, and something in that area. Will, is that about right? He's shaking his head, yes. So that's the assumption going forward over a long-term period. One of the going to the eliminate COLAs would eliminate that over time. And yes, it absolutely, the reason you have savings is it lowers the purchasing power over time. It erodes the purchasing power for retirees, and which is why I describe this as extraordinarily painful. Trying to look at a floor, so that you have a floor that impacts particularly folks that have lower retirements is one way to look at it. Recently, we did a scenario because we're continuing to look at options where we said that let's try it at 75% of the CPI. So you would have 75% of the current calculation of CPI. There's different changes. In fact, Senator Brock, you were instrumental in making a change to that several years ago, and the metric we used. And then have a 1% floor. So for instance, you would always get 1% and you would get 75% of the CPI. That still generated significant savings, and we're taking a look at whether that in combination with others. And our intent is to bring that to you folks so that we can talk and we'll answer any of your questions, but ultimately that will be a decision that you folks will have to make.
Okay, so you're using a 2.3% assumption of COLA and one of the funds. William, do you know what the other one is? Is it higher than that, or?
I'm looking it up right now. So Beth, just to clarify, the assumption for inflation is 2.3%. So that's what we think.
There you go. I knew that I needed this gentleman to correct that.
Yeah, the assumption for the COLA depends on the retirement benefits for the groups that are affected by that. So for example, I'm looking at the teachers right now. The teachers for certain groups, I'm looking at the state for now. For the state, for certain groups, it's as much as 2.4%, and for another group, it's as low as 1.35%. So it depends on what the COLA rules are for each of the groups.
Yeah. So I think
because the rate of inflation has been much lower than that, and so it seems to me that maybe you're using a higher rate of inflation than the actual inflation over the past 10 years, and that would have a huge impact as you do the math over the next 25 years, because on the bottom of page 2 in the report that you put out, it does actually say 3% is the long-term inflation rate that you're using in the report that you submitted, which is really high. That's more than twice what I believe the 10-year inflation rate is. So I could be misunderstanding it for sure, but that's what I read, and that would have a large impact on your assumptions if that's true, what you're using. So I guess
you said page 2 of the report.
Yeah, of the summary findings and recommendations.
Okay, so I'm going to that.
3% close to the long-term rate of inflation, which I don't believe that's anywhere close to long-term rate of inflation.
I have that. I have that up, Beth. That's actually a recommendation that is in the report relating to our OPEB pre-funding.
Yes.
So in that instance, we use that phrase because the required pre-funding schedule for the OPEB would need to increase at 3% each year, which is slightly higher than the inflation assumption we have in the pension reports. But that was just used as a proxy for describing a pre-funding schedule for other post-employment benefits. It doesn't have anything to do with the pension's rate of return.
Okay, it's not the assumption you're using for COLA.
That is correct.
Okay.
That was the assumption that we were using in the plan that we presented to you folks last year, which said that if we put in a small but set of seed money into these systems, increase that over time, for instance, 10% a year for a few years, then we could go at 3% for the balance of the amortization period. And then we would be able to qualify as pre-funding, because those dollars would over time be invested and lower the cost, and that would reduce the unfunded liabilities for the OPEBs, the teacher healthcare fund and the state healthcare fund, by $1.68 billion. And again, we expect to be able to submit a proposal this year on both of those.
Okay, so that was the proposal you referred to during your presentation, and do you have that in draft formed, or?
Well, we're meeting with JFO at 4:30 today to have a conversation.
Okay.
We've done several scenarios, and we're very far along with the teachers. We got some work with the actuary to kind of fine tune the state, but we expect to have that to you very,
Okay.
very shortly. And we hope that you'll look at it and frankly approve it in February. That would be wonderful.
Okay, well, I will hold questions on that since that's a different thing. But so just the COLA assumptions, it sounds, I would just say we want to make sure they're closer to actual inflation and not inflated in your model to make it look worse than it is. But I'm also, one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of people is that the solution to this has to be a combination of potentially changes in benefits, potentially, although most people don't want that, and potentially additional revenue sources. And you allude to that, or not allude, you state that directly in your report, talking about the potential for federal and COVID funds. And someone suggested to me the possibility of a solution that could be utilized is pension obligation bonds. And so I'm wondering what your response to that as a possibility is.
We're not in favor of pension obligation bonds for a number of reasons. It's an arbitrage bet. So you borrow the money, and the presumption is that you invest that at a higher rate of return than your interest rate assumption. Others have tried that. Connecticut did it in 2007. New Jersey's done it twice. California's done it. Illinois has done it, and it hasn't been very successful. And occasionally it is. It's actually something that if you had more room, in fact, if you had a higher funding percentage, might make more sense that you could take those up and downs, the volatility of the market. But very rarely does someone with a higher funding percent do that. It's more inclined for folks that have lower funding percentages, such as Connecticut and Illinois. Connecticut did it in 2007 when the market was pretty high. And then obviously in 2008, that wasn't a good moment for them. I know there are some folks in Connecticut that would argue that it's still provided benefit. In looking at that, we looked at it back in 2009, and actually we testified on it for a municipality that wanted to do that to the Senate I'm trying to remember, it probably was around 2013 or 14. And there was a recommendation, not just from me, but the bond bank director, member of the bond bank, two members of the bond bank, in taking a look at that and the risks associated with pension obligation bonds. Arbitrage bets are risky.
Okay. I have one more clarifying question, just on what you were saying about, it seems like somewhat of a contradiction. I was interested in the report as a former school board member who was involved in some early retirement, offers to teachers, to now think about it from the side of the state and thinking, oh, that costs more in the retirement system, even though it saved us money at the local level. And that's part of the problem with our system, potentially, of the state versus local funding situation. But you also said that by filling positions that should have been left open in the state employees, that caused a problem. So that seems to contradict. If you get rid of positions through early retirement, that's a problem. But if you fill positions that should have been left open, that's a problem. So why are they both problems?
Okay, so in the case of folks that were eligible for the retirement incentive, many of them had reached their normal retirement age and were working past that. So they've now maxed out on their AFC, whether it's 50% or 60%. So they are what we consider an actuarial gain, because while they do have salary increases over time, they're not going to have increases in the percentage, that maximum, the 50% or the 60%. So they become actual gains to the system. So when they retire, it's an actuarial loss. And on the other side, when you hire new people, you now have folks that have a long-term liability to the system, and the contributions haven't gone with that at this point in time. So you create a liability at both ends of the continuum there. And if I could get back, Senator, to your earlier question on inflation, that is a long-term look, again, that's been put into models and done by professionals, not the board.
Okay. Seems like a lose-lose situation, whether you fill positions or not. So,
Well, it depends on how you do it. And, we can take a look at different models we have. In 2019, we took a look at it. And it's unfortunate some of the models that actually increased pension costs were more devastating to employees. Decreased pension costs were more devastating to employees, i.e. RIFs, reductions in force. I certainly would not be recommending that. Again, I think the employees in the workforce that we have are dedicated, and that's the last thing that I would be recommending.
Thank you.
Okay, if you have another meeting at 4:30, I've got two more people with questions, and we're running out of time. So Senator Sirotkin and then Senator Bray. And if we can just kind of keep it to one or two, and then we will definitely have the treasurer back for more answers.
You're on mute, sir.
You're on mute, Senator.
I just lost 30 seconds of my time. I'll try and keep it brief. Thank you, Beth, for being here. Madam Treasurer, for being here. Seems like deja vu all over again. I represented, as you know, the state troopers. And I can vividly remember being in the Cedar Creek room with Treasurer Spalding, and I'm sure you were there behind the scenes, and the pro tem, I think it was Peter Welch at the time, and Joel Cook, all those people. And I think the legislators and the treasurer are giddy that they had solved this problem, and the teachers had come so far in giving at that point. And I guess we thought the problem was resolved. I'm going to just be very general here.
Yeah.
Can you see from the teacher's perspective that they feel like a promise has been broken to them?
What I would say is that when we made those changes, we did save money. And if you take a look at the last 3 pages of the presentation that we gave you today, we did save dollars. What I would say is that we need the promise to them is also, you need to have a sustainable system that provides retirement security. And under the current funded status, under the current trajectory, we don't. And to me, that's the paramount piece, is to make sure people have retirement security now, and the next generation and the next generation after that.
So I have just another question or comment. I agree with Senator Brock, and I appreciate what you're saying in terms of somehow changing the paradigm here, where we look at this more frequently, and we actually could make adjustments to raise some of the monies going out to teachers if the circumstances change going forward. But again, from the teacher's perspective, do you or do you not view pension as part of an overall compensation package to teachers?
I certainly see it as part of their compensation and part of their benefit structure, and I get that. And again, which is why we said these are painful recommendations, and the alternative is to end up with a system that is not sustainable, or a system such as a defined contribution or a hybrid, which is a combination of DP and DC, that provides very little and no security in many cases. I want to see people have reliable income.
I guess what I would say to that comment, as I go to Senator Hardy's comment, is when we have these grand bargains and we try and reach resolutions, usually there's pain on both sides. In this case, I guess it's pain to the overall population and keeping a promise to a narrow group of people. And so I think we need to look at that as well. And I just ask you, I don't know if it's quantifiable, but what kind of cut on average could you say we are proposing in compensation by this to our teachers?
Well, it wouldn't be compensation because, it would in as much as the employee contributions would increase. So that would be a change. It obviously isn't affecting your salary level, but it does affect how much your take-home pay is. Now, remember that this is pre-tax dollars, so that some of these dollars would be lower. That February 22nd report that I mentioned, we're going to address that.
Okay. I'll let others go. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Bray.
I'll ask one short question. I think, thank you for coming. And like many people here, I have plenty of teachers in my family. I used to teach. We all love teachers. We probably have many good stories about people who were important in our lives growing up. And I don't want to say that so casual. I don't want that to sound at all casual, but I do want to somehow talk about sort of the elephant in the room for me, which is I also hear from many people who have, other than Social Security, they have no retirement package, and they feel like they're out there funding benefits that they wish they could have. And so I'm just trying to have a sense of what that universe of payers looks like. Do you have, and I know you've tried to come up with retirement programs for people who aren't part of a program like this. So I know you're working on it. This is an entirely sympathetic question, but what does the average Vermonter's retirement package look like?
Well, a few years ago,
people who aren't teachers, who aren't VSEA employees, like take them out. What do Vermonters as a whole look like?
Well, we looked at Social Security a few years ago, so this is dated data, and I believe it was someplace around the $14,000 was the average Social Security for Vermonters. I don't know what they have in savings. I think we projected some dollars on that. I'd have to go back and look at that report. It was part of our financial literacy work. And again, it's difficult to say people have savings. Frankly, we found a lot of folks during the COVID crisis and the Great Recession did not have what the 3 to 6 month savings that are recommended by financial folks in terms of downturns or unexpected events. But clearly, folks that do not have retirement plans. Now, there are retirement plans, including defined benefit plans in the private sector, and there are folks that do not have it. My answer to that, Senator, is raise all boats. Everyone should have retirement security. The program that we have, the Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan, we're working out some last pieces on it. As you know, the Federal Department of Labor put a little bit of a regulatory problem with it. We resolved that with legislation with you folks. We went out to rebid it. We're ready to go. We're going to start testing it with some, as I say, some test groups. But that to me is a big step toward retirement security. And our financial literacy, discussions, the three pieces of the stool, savings, a retirement plan, and Social Security. We want to make sure that folks are aware of that. We want to help with the Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan. But again, my answer to that is no one should be in a position where they do not have adequate money and reliable income in retirement. We want to make sure that every single person in this state, every single person has an opportunity for financial well-being. That's our goal with our programs. And with you folks as partners, we think we can do that for our citizens.
Sure. Well, I think probably everyone here would like to raise all boats. Mm-hmm. I think there's a sizable number of people, and I can't quantify it, but it comes across in emails and conversations that people who feel like they're not in any boat.
Yeah.
And they're worried. And so it creates tension in the community when one group feels treated differently than the others. Yeah. And it makes it.
I guess what I would say to that, there are two ways to look at it. The pie is just so big, and when you have a slice that somebody else doesn't, or that you can have a bigger pie. And for me, having a bigger pie is the answer. And I will say that my definition of affordability is investing in people. Whether that's I'm going to get out of my my wheelhouse here, but whether it's single payer health care, whether it's family leave, whether it's housing, these are issues that are important. And we need to take a look and invest in people as we move forward, because that's the definition of affordability in my view. When you take a look at folks that live in Burlington, where it has higher rents, and you just got out of college, let's say UVM or something, and you're trying to find a place to work, they do not have childcare if they need it a few years down the road. If they don't have housing that they can afford, they do not have benefits that they can afford. That's part of the reason we have our demographic problems. And working together, we need to address those issues.
Thank you for coming in.
Okay. I guess if you need to leave at 4:30,
I think I'm there, yes.
you have given us a few extra minutes, so thank you. Committee, I think we're going to do some committee discussion and decide what we would like to do with this. So I'm going to ask you to stay on. I believe Senator Pearson, you're in charge now. So thank you, Treasurer Pearson. Thank you, Mr. Krewald.
So-called.
You're not that in charge.
No, that's clear.
I'm looking, I think Faith just sent me next week's agenda, which started out pretty light and has suddenly filled up, but it is actually fairly common that at this time of the year, finance finds itself with a little extra time because not a whole lot of bills come directly to us. And right now with COVID, there's even fewer bills. I was going to do all the bills we have, several of which we've done before. We are going to do the feminine hygiene product because that we didn't do last year. The candy tax is there. The exemption from sales tax for home heating fuel is there. The, I forget what else. But if we're going to do any of those, it seems kind of counterproductive when we have a recommendation from the tax commission that we put a sales tax on everything, if we then are exempting things or taxing things until we decide exactly what the policy is going to be. And that bill would dedicate the candy tax to childcare, but I believe I know there are new proposals for expanding childcare and childcare, the subsidy. And they've been in the works for several years. So I know that's out there. Senator Pearson.
Madam Chair, I've been wondering, and I third hand, the quote was, studies are for losers. I think that's attributed to
They're obviously not on health and welfare.
Senator Aluzzi. But I've been thinking about this tax structure committee, and I everybody knows I've been itching to see if we could shift schools more to an income-based setup. And I guess I'm just wondering, that's a big project. The idea of making significant changes to the sales tax, a big project. And I wonder if you've thought or talked to the pro tem or anything about, some ability for us to deal with that in the off session. I'm still tired from
September. About the off session, what I've talked to the pro tem about is that every year for the past 5 or 6 years, there have been several very good, bills with very good objectives: free primary care, free college, support the safety net, global warming, the Green New Deal. And they've all relied on taxing the rich. I'm assuming that's the upper tax bracket, which is, I don't know, it's 300 and some thousand. Randy, you probably know better than I do after we collapsed it. With 2 professionals in a family, that is not hard to hit. And those are people we're also trying to recruit. So what I've said to everyone, Senator Polina mostly, is that I think there might be elasticity at the top. I'm willing to go after it, but I'm pretty sure we spent it 5 times over. And I think, I'm concerned about the verbiage of taxing the rich if we're trying to attract young professionals to the state. And 2 young professionals can easily hit that definition. I asked Joint Fiscal today, if there was any way we could determine if what elasticity might be there. I'm not sure. And also to give us a presentation on the impact that recent changes in tax codes have made. We collapsed the top 2 brackets. I don't know what that did. The federal government did away with the deduction for state and local taxes. So if I were paying $8,000 or $100,000 on state and local taxes, I used to get to deduct that. I don't. So that's a cost. And I'm trying to put kind of a fence around who we're talking about, what the impact is. When we start talking in the rich, I think we all see some nasty hedge fund guy sitting up there figuring out how they can, put the screws to the average working person. And, last year, the Green New Deal had a $200,000 threshold. That would have been 2 doctors, a doctor and a nurse with some advanced degrees. And last year we would have hit them with a surcharge. I want to make sure we know who we're talking about, what the impact is before we do something. And then I think it makes a difference what we choose to do it for. I don't think the pensions will meet snuff, but that's where I am. I'm still trying to gather, and I've asked the pro tem to have some caucus discussion around the issue, which I'm hopeful we'll have soon. Senator Brock and then Senator Hardy.
Well, one of the questions, of course, is the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission. That's one of the things that I would assume that they should have done, is take an analysis to see who's here and in what tax brackets, and also what the inflow and outflow of that has been. We haven't seen their full report, has not been released yet, but I would expect, and I sort of think we can inquire as to what type of information of that kind has already been compiled, and I suspect there is a considerable amount.
We're also, I've asked to have us, we did major changes to the tax code in, I believe, 2018 in response to the federal tax cuts, which would have resulted in Vermonters paying $30 million more in taxes. And some of those were very controversial. The medical deduction, doing away with significant parts of medical deduction, charitable deductions. And we haven't gone back and said, I don't think the charitable deductions went away the way it was feared, because they haven't come back to us and said, we're going broke and you did this to us. But we need to check on that. And we need to see what happened as a result of what we did then, and then look at the recommendations. There isn't too much in the way of income tax. Look at what we've done. Look at the results. The result we got, both have recommended we move to taxing services, which is where wealth really is in this economy. And can we do that? Do we have to do all services? Can we do some services? And what would we have to do to cut the rates, which would help our little battle with New Hampshire. But those are all questions I think are out there. So it's not exciting, but yeah, Senator Hardy.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Senator Pearson was suggesting, which I'm new to this committee. I've had 4 weeks here, but we've gotten some really interesting reports in those 4 weeks. The tax structure committee making pretty significant recommendations and, still coming out with their final report. And then the tax expenditure report that JFO also did for us. I think there are things to dig into there that aren't necessarily, in the tax the rich category,
right.
But could be changes that would be more efficient, would make more sense, would be more equitable, would be more revenue generating in a way that is completely logical and maybe even not controversial. But
no, there's nothing in taxes that isn't controversial.
I was looking at your box, Randy, to see if you were gonna shake your head, but anyway. But I think there's a lot there to dig into, and I think it could be really interesting, and we have only had really brief discussions about it, and that I think is what Senator Pearson is talking about, is having a broader, in-depth look at some of these proposals. And I'm super skeptical and have been about moving school education funding completely to the income tax. However, I was much more convinced just on the one presentation we got. So I'd really like to hear more and get the opportunity to really discuss it more. And it just feels like we don't have that especially during the regular session. And so that's what I think Senator Pearson was talking about.
Getting it, the question, yeah. They have to pay us if we meet off session, so that gets to be a little difficult.
I don't know. But we're pretty cheap. We are really cheap for the amount of work
we can do it. What I want to do is take that proposal, but then not take it in a vacuum, but take it in the realm of what we've done in taxes, who's been impacted, who's likely to be impacted, and just give it a broad start broad and then narrow down, because I think unless they come out with some other documentation, about a tax capacity study, and we've had one of those in the past, do that. We do there's a huge book on the foregone revenue for all those tax exemptions. What Joint Fiscal has done is they have taken 2 or 3 a year and done a deep dive into looking at them. This year, we came up with two of probably the easier, or ones that they seem to like. Other years it's been a lot more controversial. The big ones are the business, the veggie tax exemptions, TIFs, and those are controversial every year, but I think there have been years where we've tried to take all of them on, and it's been hard. But I intend to look at all of them seriously. Senator McDonald and then Senator Bray. You're muted, Senator.
Just about 2 years ago, the federal government made a huge change in taxation, which widened the divide between the well-to-do and those that are tackling stuff. And they did that without a lot of study. They did it right after Christmas because they sat down and they did it. And when we take on the tough issues that you've just listed, and we, someone like Senator Pearson says there should be some time to deal with the special issues that you've just listed. The tendency is to say, well, that's too expensive and we can't let legislators do that. And that's our opportunity to fight back against what's happening to us as we sit here and watch a smaller and smaller group of this country get very wealthy and the rest of the people scratch their heads and wonder why. And this has been going on for about 30, 35 years, and it's not going to be dealt with some of the minor taxes, and it's not going to be dealt with tinkering with the things that we always tinker with. So as our leader, Madam Chair, you've take us in a new direction, please.
If you want my personal opinion, there's two prongs to that. There's tax structure, but there's also, we haven't floated the boat on the bottom up. When you look at any of the tests, I was on the minimum wage study committee, the buying power, and since the Great Recession early in this century, the buying power for the majority of Vermonters has been flat. The buying power for the majority of Americans has gone down consistently since, I believe, the 70s, when we had double-digit inflation. And I see it's not just bringing down, it's also bringing up and closing that gap. This committee can't do a whole lot except on things like minimum wage to float that boat up. But I'd like to see us as a group have a platform that does both. We tried on minimum wage. We're going to try again. The feds might do it. It'd be a lot easier if the feds did it. But we'll try again. And no one has to agree with me, but I believe in doing our homework
Yes, ma'am.
and paying our fair share, which is never me. As long as it's not me, we all pay our fair share. Senator Bray.
So, this feels to me like a caucus sort of discussion in a way, or a Senate discussion, because and I think about it, the problem with redistribution after income is it is a very freighted conversation. It's trying to correct flaws in the underlying economy through redistribution. I would think most people would rather see more people earn a good living that left them in a better position to begin with. And some of that could be something like minimum wage. Some of that could be better benefits. If people weren't leaving college with huge debts, if childcare were socialized, those things could offload expenses from families. And they're very different cures. One is moving money around after the fact. One is saying, let's help people do better, period. And another one is saying, okay, more than we used to, we're going to socialize costs so that people are just more secure. And I think back to the tax the rich is such a dangerous phrase. I think when I think of, I think Anthony's and Dave Zuckerman's plan was similar, right? There was a windfall. It was only collecting something like half of the windfall from the 2017 federal tax change. So that, I don't know how people no one could have been, I think, counting on a windfall. once they receive it, I'm sure they feel like it's really theirs. It's like, oh, this is a windfall. I'm going to give half away. But it did seem like a more legitimate funding request because no one was counting on that money. It became a bit of a bonus, in the end. So, I mean, the whole thing is, that's why, because there's so many different pieces, it would be helpful, I think, for us if our colleagues in other committees and the caucus, for instance, Senator Sirotkin and the economic development folks are thinking about how do you bring up wages. Others are thinking about how do you improve healthcare or childcare, socializing more service. And it feels like it's pretty tough if it's all going to land on us.
Oh, no, it's not going to all land on us.
Right.
I think I'm just trying to tell you for the background information I've asked for.
Right. Well,
and then forward.
Okay. I think I probably have to be honest. When I hear about two professionals earning $200,000, I feel like those in Vermont, those people are fortunate, so I know that they may have taken on debt that's also proportional to that high income. Like, so I know it's not just a bed of roses necessarily. When your income's high, you might have law school or medical school to pay off. Who knows? Vet school, the average vet graduates with $126,000 of debt. Stuff
Why
like
my
that.
daughter's a vet tech.
So
yeah.
Anyway,
no,
so
I
I'm
mean,
kind of rambling.
There's all kinds of things in there. I just don't want us making decisions with blinders on. If we're making decisions, I think as far as possible, we should know who's going to be impacted and how much and why.
And can I ask one really quick question? Because I wasn't sure I followed, sorry. And that was elasticity. So I think the way I have heard about it in the past was elasticity of demand. If the price goes up, to what degree does the consumption of that fall? When you were talking about tax rates, upper level tax rates, when you said elasticity, what were you referring to? That people leave the state?
Yeah, no. I am not getting into why people come and why people go. Elasticity, I think, is how much, disposable income is there. I mean, if they're giving $100,000 to charity a year, is that money that they could do for taxes? And who are they? There's a wide range between 300,000 and $1 billion. I mean, who's the they? And the folks with the trust funds that can live under $90,000 a year because they have simple tastes. Is their income what they, their ability to pay or not? I don't know. And I know it's hard. We tried to get at that with the property tax rebate program and got in a lot of trouble.
Madam Chair, when we create trusts and things like that, that is a part of our redistribution of wealth in this country. And that redistributes the wealth upward. And I don't know if we should call distributing wealth upward the unsocializing of America any more than, and those words don't help. But we're sitting here and we watch it happen and we point to where it's taking place. And what do?
And a lot of it has happened because of tax policy. And we're the finance committee. We're the tax committee. So we who believe in equity and fairness in our tax policy need to do something about it. That's why we're here.
That's what we are going to be looking at.
Well,
I just,
and I was just asking that we have some time, since it will be impossible to do in the next 2 months, to look at Randy's tax analysis that he had dialed up in depth and understand the questions you're asking, Madam Chair. We're all asking those questions.
right.
I'm not reached a conclusion. I guess I'm sort of saying, is this another study we're going to put on the shelf, or could we come up with a plan to dig in with it and then decide, should we follow the study that Randy dialed up or not? And
Well,
forever reference
and I
it.
think we should look at both tax kind of studies together. They were set up structurally I think very differently. But I think we should take a look at them. I think we should take a look at what we know and what we don't know. If we have to ask to do some, I mean, at this point, who knows if we'll be here this summer or not. But if we have to ask for some time off session to do that, I'm willing to do it. I think it's important. It's what we do. I've always said, no one lets me do my job, they won't let me raise taxes. But I want to make sure when we do it, we know what we're doing. And it's not based on assumptions. We just seem to be dealing with, we thought we knew what we were doing with the pensions, and maybe we didn't. So I want to make sure we get the answers up front. All set? I think that's it for the day.